Chapter 939. When all the concubines and madams came to the empress's palace, they saw the empress and the crown princess talking and laughing. It was rumored that the empress and the crown princess had a very good relationship, as if they were biological mother and daughter. Those madams thought that it was an exaggeration, but now it seemed that it was true. Today, Wuxia entered the palace with her mother, the left prime minister's wife. She had put in a lot of effort to dress up. The empress's birthday was naturally not a brainless dress-up. She was dressed in a festive manner, as if she was at a funeral. However, this celebration was also particular. There were only so many bright colors. How to make oneself stand out from a group of people was an extremely difficult task. The left prime minister's wife had originally chosen a red gown for her daughter. On such an occasion, red was the most appropriate color. Of course, it was also difficult to show off in the crowd. The left prime minister's wife was an intelligent woman. This could be seen from the fact that the left prime minister's residence had never had any problems and her excellent reputation in the capital. Today, the empress was the main character, and there was also the crown princess who had just gotten married. She did not want her daughter to be the focus of everyone's attention on such an occasion. Unfortunately, Wuxia did not appreciate her mother's kindness. When Madame Lu saw her daughter walking out of the courtyard, her gaze paused. She was wearing a light purple gown that perfectly displayed her slender figure. She had exquisite makeup on her face, and her hair was decorated with light tassels. It was gorgeous and did not lose the charm of a girl. It was beautiful, but it was too prickly. Madame Lu subconsciously frowned, but looking at the time, it was too late to go back and change. She could only bring her daughter into the carriage. Why didn't you listen to mother's advice? Madame Lu sighed. She had given birth to 2 sons before getting this daughter. She usually treated her like an eyeball and was very precious. This caused Wuxia to have a domineering personality. Wuxia smiled gently, but her tone was coquettish. Mother, I don't know how many people are wearing the red gown that you chose for me today. I don't want to bump into them. Seeing the pride and anticipation in Wuxia's eyes, Madame Lu sighed. As a mother, she more or less understood her daughter's thoughts. The crown prince already had a crown princess, and it was rumored that the relationship between the couple was very good. She had advised her daughter many times to stop thinking about other things, but this daughter of hers always changed the subject. She was an experienced person, so how could she not know the thoughts hidden under her daughter's gentle appearance? However, the crown princess had just gotten married, and it was rumored that His Highness the Crown Prince had been staying overnight in the crown princess's bedroom every day. To be so powerful, he must not be a simple character. She hid the worry in her heart and only instructed Wuxia to keep a low profile in the palace and not be in the limelight. Wuxia agreed on the surface, but no one knew what she was thinking. Gu Xingyin sat next to the empress, smiling as she accepted the compliments of the noble madams. Her Highness the Crown Prince Consort's outer robe is truly a work of art. A marchioness praised with a smile. Purple was not a color that was easy to control. Too much of it would make it vulgar, and too little of it would make it difficult to suppress one's aura. Therefore, there were not many people wearing purple today. Among these people, whether it was in terms of the finesse of the clothing or the rarity of the material, Gu Xingyin's robe was naturally the best. Gu Xingyin maintained a warm and reserved smile as she chatted freely with the madam surrounding her. Chapter 940. Hearing this question, she seemed to be very happy as she looked at the empress and smiled. Is that so? I also feel that this robe is very beautiful. Imperial Mother specially ordered the manufacturing company to make it for me. After she said this, the people around her flattered that the empress and the crown prince consort were closer than biological mother and daughter. When Wuxia followed her mother into the palace, she noticed the most lively place in the hall. The 2 noblest women in Great Lai were surrounded by everyone, but Wuxia did not look at the dignified empress. Her gaze was fixed on Gu Xingyin. She was also wearing purple. Gu Xingyin seemed to have sensed the intense gaze of this consciousness and looked in this direction from afar. Lu Shi subconsciously puffed out her chest and raised her head. She was not willing to lower her head to Su Chaohua at any time. Unfortunately, Gu Xingyin did not seem to notice her. Her gaze casually swept over her face and then looked away as if she did not see anything. This was more excessive than any provocation. What was the greatest arrogance the enemy had towards you? It was not contempt, but complete disregard. Lu Shi could not help but clench her hands tightly. No matter how she endured it on her face, there was still a trace of indignation. Lu Furen, who was walking beside her, sensitively sensed that her daughter's mood was not right. She reached out and patted her arm, saying in a low voice, "This is the Empress Palace. No matter what you think, you cannot make any mistakes." But there was a calm smile on her face. Lu Shi returned to her senses and forced a smile. She walked to her seat with Lu Furen. Some of the Furens who were on good terms came over to talk. "The Fu's Miss Lu is becoming more and more beautiful. I don't know which family's son will be lucky enough to marry such a beautiful woman in the future." A familiar Furen joked. Lu Shi lowered her head shyly. Another madam saw the clothes on Lu Shi's body clearly. "The clothes on Miss Lu's body are quite unique." She looked at Lu Shi with an uncontrollable shock in her eyes. Lu Shi could not help but smile when she heard this. She did not waste an hour of her meticulous dressing up. But when she looked up, she saw Gu Xingyin in front of her. Unlike the slightly lighter purple on his body, the other party's robes were a dense deep purple. Such a solemn and imposing color would not be able to suppress the aura of an ordinary person, making them appear very old-fashioned. However, Gu Xingyin used her own aura to suppress the robe. This dark purple color fully displayed the advantages of her appearance. Her skin was whiter than snow, and her facial features were exquisite and beautiful. She was not overshadowed by the Empress, who was also dressed up and had a powerful aura. It was as if he was born to live in the eyes of others. A trace of unwillingness appeared in Lu Shi's eyes. She knew. She knew from the moment she entered the hall. She knew from the moment she saw the crown princess attire that her 2 hours of meticulous dressing had been completely meaningless. Regardless of appearance, temperament, or dressing. Today, she was suppressed by that woman who was high up in the air. After Lu Furen finished chatting with a Furen, she looked up at her daughter. Taking in her dejected expression, she could not help but feel heartache. With your appearance, there are countless nobles in the capital. Mother will definitely find a top young talent for you," Lu Shi faintly interrupted her mother's words. "But in this world, there is no talent that can compare to Brother Yunqi." Chapter 941. Madame Lu was speechless. In terms of status, who could be more honorable than the crown prince in this world? But, Madame Lu raised her head and glanced at the crown prince consort, who was smiling gracefully as the empress held her hand. The crown prince consort who was so dazzling among so many madams and misses who were dressed up meticulously. She sighed. With such a crown prince consort who was a newlywed, how could the crown prince's thoughts fall on her daughter? Moreover, as a mother, she always hoped for the best for her daughter. No matter how honorable the title of the crown prince's secondary consort sounded, she was only a concubine. Which mother would be willing to let her pampered daughter grow up to be a lowly concubine? Moreover, if Lu Shi married into another family, if she suffered any grievances, their family could still help her. But if she married into the imperial family, then her life and death would truly be up to fate. She had always believed that her would understand this reasoning and waited for her to figure it out herself. But now, her seemed to be even more bewitched. Madame Lu held her daughter's hand. It seemed that she had to have a good talk with her daughter after returning home today. At this time, an eunuch's shrill voice came from outside. "His Highness the Crown Prince has arrived." The hall instantly quieted down, and the womenfolk all sat upright. Some who had never seen the crown prince stealthily glanced at the crown prince, who had just stepped into the hall. Yun Qi did not care about the various obscure sizing-up gazes in the store. He personally presented the gift held by the eunuch behind him to the empress, then gave a big bow and said a few words of blessing. Gu Xingyin's eyes widened the moment Yun Qi entered the hall. This man really was, her heart warmed, as if it was slowly washed by the warmest wine. There were too many womenfolk in the hall, so it was not convenient for Yun Qi to stay for long. After personally presenting the gift, he glanced at Gu Xingyin behind the empress, smiled at her, and prepared to leave. At this time, Ping Shiwang Estate's old consort, who was sitting on the other side of the empress, suddenly cried out. Everyone's attention was attracted by her actions. The old consort of Ping Shiwang was more than 60 years old. Her silver hair was meticulously tied into a bun. Her eyes were not as turbid as the eyes of an ordinary old person. Instead, she was very spirited. She was of high seniority in the royal family and had a good reputation. Even the empress would affectionately address her as imperial aunt. The empress asked with great concern, "What's wrong, imperial aunt?" Ping Shiwang's old consort narrowed her eyes and smiled. She pointed at Gu Xingyin and then pointed at Yun Qi. This old one took a look just now and found that the clothes on His Highness the Crown Prince and Her Highness the Crown Prince consort seemed to be made from the same material. Everyone took a closer look. Sure enough, the Crown Prince was wearing the same heavy purple robe. When he came in earlier, no one paid much attention to him. Now that he was standing with the Crown Princess, their clothes were not the same. Even the cloud patterns on their cuffs were exactly the same. A few of the newly married madams secretly blushed, but the older madams all laughed out loud. Her Highness the Empress took a closer look and then looked teasingly at Gu Xingyin, who was blushing and forcing herself to remain calm. "Aya, this is incredible. It's fine if you two go in and out together, but now, even your clothes have to be made from the same material." Such a small matter, if it really happened to Gu Xingyin, she would not feel anything at all. But Su Chaohua had never experienced such a situation, so she could only feign shyness and smile while pinching her handkerchief. Chapter 942. Yun Qi admired his little wife's adorable blush and felt that she would be embarrassed if this continued. Thus, he coughed lightly and stood up. "This prince felt that this material looked good, so I had the manufacturing company use it to make an outer robe." The Crown Prince's words were clearly helping the Crown Prince consort out of her predicament. When everyone saw the Crown Prince consort's slightly red face, how could they not know? They sensibly changed the topic. Seeing this, Yun Qi did not stay any longer and bid farewell to the Empress before leaving the hall. Gu Xingyin only felt that the madams in the hall were looking at her with very thought-provoking gazes. She knew what they were thinking and did not speak. She just sat there demurely like the Crown Prince consort. Seeing her like this, the Empress nodded in satisfaction. The Crown Prince consort of the imperial family could be shy, but she still had to be able to control the situation at crucial moments. Those madams were all shrewd people. When they saw that the Crown Prince consort was so fond of the Crown Prince, their smiles became even more solicitous when they faced Gu Xingyin. Even old consort Ping Shi tugged on Gu Xingyin's hand and said that this child had an affinity with her. Without any explanation, she pinned a rare purple jade cloud hairpin on Gu Xingyin's hair. Lu Shi sat quietly at the side with a very calm expression. But if one looked closely, they would discover that the handkerchief she had placed on her skirt had been scratched out of shape. The fingernails under the handkerchief had even dug into her palms until they were bleeding. Wearing a similar outer robe and taking the initiative to help his wife out, this was his big brother Yun Qi. Madame Lu had originally been very worried when she saw the scene in the hall and was afraid that her daughter would lose control of her emotions. Now that she saw Lu Shi like this, she felt much more reassured and comforted. It looked like she had really grown up and was able to distinguish between important and urgent matters. However, she didn't know what her daughter was thinking in her heart at this moment with a calm expression. Gu Xingyin sat with her for a while before being chased out of the hall by the Empress. The Empress said that she wanted to chat with her old friends and did not want her to eavesdrop. However, Gu Xingyin knew that the Empress was afraid that she would be bored sitting here alone and wanted her to go out and play. She smiled and accepted the Empress' good intentions. She bowed and walked out of the Empress' palace with the palace maids behind her. Seeing Gu Xingyin's figure disappear from the hall, Lu Shi's eyes flickered. She also found an excuse to say goodbye to Lu Shi and walked out. Your Highness Crowned Prince Consort. Gu Xingyin was walking slowly in the imperial garden. She said that she would be leaving for a while, but she couldn't go too far. She couldn't go back to her own palace, so she could only walk around the imperial garden. Fortunately, the imperial garden of the royal family contained countless precious flowers and plants in the world. No matter when one came, they would always be able to appreciate a different kind of beauty. This voice made Gu Xingyin stop in her tracks. She recognized this voice and was even more clear about who the owner of this voice was. Lu Shi quickened her pace and caught up. This was the first time she looked at Gu Xingyin so carefully. She had a new look in her eyes. Lu Shi had always known that Su Chaohua was good-looking. As early as when Su Chaohua was still in her boudoir, the emperor had praised her for her beauty and etiquette. In the past, she had always looked at this woman who had stolen her sweetheart with a strange gaze. This time, looking at her as a stranger, she was shocked to realize how beautiful she was. From beginning to end, as a woman, she was amazed and jealous. She was amazed at Su Chaohua's unique beauty. She was even more jealous that after her marriage, this kind of beauty had a layer of charm and grace that a young girl did not have. Chapter 943. Lu Shi had heard of a saying. When a woman got married, it was equivalent to a second growth. Usually, after a woman got married, there would be two different situations. One was that her original beauty would become even more dazzling under the nourishment, and the other was that she would lose her original brilliance under the waste. No matter how one looked at it, Crown Princess Su Chaohua belonged to the former. This also meant that after her wedding, she was living very well in the Eastern Palace. Gu Xingyin stood there with a faint smile on her face, allowing her to size her up. She was originally wondering when Lu Shi would remember the difference between their statuses. But it was obvious that the other party did not realize this and only kept staring at her. Gu Xingyin finally could not help but speak. Miss Lu, it seems that the rules this consort had you learn last time, Miss Lu did not learn them well enough. The cold voice without any warmth made Lu Shi suddenly come back to her senses. She remembered her experience in the past 3 months and her heart quivered. She quickly bowed to Gu Xingyin. Crown Princess, please forgive me. This subject was amazed by Her Highness' beauty and forgot herself for a moment. Please forgive me. Gu Xingyin looked at Lu Shi with some surprise. She did not expect that one day, Su Chaohua could hear praise from Lu Shi's mouth. She chuckled and looked at Lu Shi. Miss Lu, why are you looking for this consort? Lu Shi remembered the purpose of her visit and looked hesitantly at the palace maid behind Gu Xingyin. This meant that she wanted to send her away. Gu Xingyin did not do as she wished. Miss Lu, if you have something to say, you can say it directly. Lu Shi was ashamed and angry. How could she let others hear what she was going to say later? But she could not do anything to Gu Xingyin. Gu Xingyin enjoyed Lu Shi's conflicted look for a while with a wicked interest. When she looked at him with pleading eyes again, he finally mercifully let the palace maid behind him leave. He only left his trusted aide Kai He by his side. Lu Shi glanced at Kai He and then looked at Gu Xingyin's expression. Inside, she knew that this was most likely the Crown Princess confidant. The other probably would not leave her without someone by her side. She secretly took a deep breath in her heart, as if giving herself unlimited courage. She looked straight at Gu Xingyin and said, "Crown Princess Consort, I wonder if His Highness the Crown Prince has ever mentioned this subject in front of you?" Gu Xingyin was speechless. Was this a showdown? She thought about it for a moment. When encountering such a situation, a normal person's reaction would probably be to be surprised and ask impatiently. Lu Shi was probably waiting for his response too, right? Thus, Gu Xingyin looked at Lu Shi in confusion and said faintly, "Perhaps, but Ben Gong doesn't remember." Lu Shi, who was filled with the desire to confide but couldn't vent. Why would there be such an unconventional person? She took a deep breath and forced a smile on her face. Today, she came with the courage to cut off all means of retreat. She absolutely could not give up because of this little setback. The next moment, Lu Shi's eyes turned red. She looked pitifully at Gu Xingyin and said, "Crown Princess Consort, this subject knows that in your heart, this subject is as insignificant as the dust on the ground. It doesn't matter if you don't remember this subject," Gu Xingyin impatiently interrupted her. "Miss Lu, Ben Gong came out today to admire the flowers, not to listen to your sentimental self-talk." Lu Shi, the bitter atmosphere that he had worked so hard to create was instantly destroyed. Chapter 944. She looked at Gu Xingyin in confusion. In her impression, Su Chaohua was a woman with perfect etiquette. She would never do something as unreasonable as interrupting someone's speech. However, she had already interrupted his statement twice today. Was there a mistake in the rumors? Or was this woman too good at acting? Gu Xingyin did it on purpose. Su Chaohua was gentle and generous, but in front of her love rival, if she still cared about her ladylike demeanor, then she was not generous, she was stupid. She wanted Lu Shi to hold it in. Hold it in. But Gu Xingyin clearly underestimated Lu Shi's tenacity. After being interrupted twice in a row, Lu Shi quickly organized her words and began her third statement. This time, she clearly learned her lesson. She did not use any flirting techniques and went straight to the point. "Your Highness the Crown Prince Consort, this subject's daughter came this time to ask you to help me and His Highness the Crown Prince." Lu Shi looked earnestly at Gu Xingyin. Gu Xingyin, oh, ah. Was there something wrong with this woman's head? She purposely looked behind her and discovered that the usually calm Kai he was also looking at Lu Shi with a face full of shock. Clearly, she was quite frightened. She was not the only one who was shocked. This realization made her relax. It was clear that the problem was not her, but this Lu Shi who had been tricked for some reason. Probably because the Crown Prince Consort and her servant's expressions were too surprised, Lu Shi very considerately paused as if to give the two time to react. When Gu Xingyin frowned and came back to his senses, Lu Shi once again began her affectionate confession. "Your Highness the Crown Prince Consort, His Highness the Crown Prince and I have known each other since we were young. We have more than 10 years of feelings. I know that you are the Crown Prince Consort, but I do not dare to ask for such a noble position like yours. I only hope that you can help me and His Highness on account of my sincerity to him." Gu Xingyin sighed in amazement. Listen, what is the art of language? Clearly, Yin Qi had already made it clear to her that from now on, the two of them had nothing to do with each other, but from Lu Shi's mouth, it became the two of them were in love with each other, but because she was in the middle, they could not be together. If at this moment, the person occupying Su Chaohua's body wasn't himself, he would have had the system cheat and knew that his lover would never betray him. Most likely, any woman who heard these words would have doubts in their hearts. After Lu Shi finished speaking, she almost lost all her strength. She anxiously waited for Gu Xingyin's response. She might get angry and fly into a rage. She might question the Crown Prince and make a scene. If that happened, there would definitely be cracks in the relationship between her and the Crown Prince. At that time, he would be able to use their many years of relationship to climb to the top. She might endure it, but once the seed of doubt was planted, it would start to sprout. After a long time, it would lead to a bigger conflict between the two of them. Or the best possibility was, but Lu Shi had thought of so many things, but she didn't expect that Gu Xingyin's expression didn't change at all after hearing her words. She felt the other party's gaze lightly sweep across her face. That gaze carried a trace of coldness, and the other party looked at her with a faint smile. Facing Gu Xingyin's expression, a trace of panic suddenly flashed across Lu Shi's heart. It was as if all the most secretive things buried deep in her heart had been seen through by her, without a trace left out. Chapter 945. She subconsciously puffed out her chest, as if this would give her a little more confidence. Seeing that Gu Xingyin did not speak, she thought that the other party was considering, so she continued, "Brother Yun Qi originally promised me that he would marry me 3 months after the wedding." After saying this, she was satisfied to see that Kai He, who was behind Gu Xingyin, had turned pale. But before she could rejoice, she heard a gloomy voice behind her. "Is that so?" Lu Shi was frightened and suddenly turned around. Yun Qi was standing behind her. She did not know how long the other party had been standing there and how much he had heard of her words. However, Lu Shi was not in the mood to think about this at this moment. She was so frightened by Yun Qi's sudden burst of aura that she could not stand steadily. Lu Shi had never seen such a terrifying expression on Yun Qi's face. The other party's dark eyes stared at her and his expression was frighteningly cold. He looked at her as if he was looking at a dead object. It was clearly a suitable season, but Lu Shi felt that she had fallen into an ice cave in an instant. She did not doubt that in that instant, Yun Qi wanted to take her life. Lu Shi's body started to tremble uncontrollably. Yun Qi's voice was very low. This prince did not know that this prince and Miss Lu had made a lifelong vow of love. Lu Shi opened her mouth and wanted to explain, but she could not say anything. Yun Qi stared at her coldly and continued, "This prince thought that this prince had already made things clear to Miss Lu back at the pavilion. This prince does not want to be too rude to women, but that is also based on the other party's tactfulness." Lu Shi was so frightened by his sinister aura that she could not help but take a step back. However, Yun Qi did not intend to let her go and stepped forward. His eyes were sinister as he stared at her coldly. "This prince will say this one last time, the crown princess is this prince's life. If anyone dares to have any ideas about her, this prince will definitely make them regret it for the rest of their lives." Lu Shi finally could not bear it and knelt on the ground with a plop. This appearance, Yun Qi disdainfully glanced at Lu Shi, who had lost her composure, and coldly shouted, "Scram!" Lu Shi hurriedly got up from the ground as if he had been pardoned and left unsteadily. When Yun Qi turned around and looked at Gu Xingyin again, it was as if he had changed into another person. The gloominess on his face disappeared without a trace and was replaced by tenderness in his eyes. Kai He had already tactfully retreated when Yun Qi arrived. Yun Qi looked at his calm wife and said with a hint of nervousness in his voice, "Ruru." He was a little scared. Ruru had just seen his violent side. What if she was afraid of him? Gu Xingyin turned around as if it was her first time meeting Yun Qi. In the past, the other party had always been gentle and harmless in front of her. She had thought that her lover was really a gentle and occasionally lively little lamb. Only today did he realize that the other party was not harmless at all. He was clearly a sleeping lion. Yun Qi noticed that his wife's eyes were wandering on his face, and he felt uneasy. Unexpectedly, the person opposite him suddenly laughed out loud. Yun Qi was confused by her laughter, but at least he knew that she was not angry, so he was relieved. "Ruru. You're not angry. You're not afraid." He took a step forward and gently hugged his wife before softly asking. Chapter 946. Gu Xingyin struggled slightly and got out of his arms. This was the imperial garden and there were many guests coming and going today. It was not good to be seen hugging the crown prince and the crown princess in public. Obviously, Yun Qi also knew this, so Gu Xingyin could leave his arms so easily. Angry? Gu Xingyin was not angry because of this. As for fear, Gu Xingyin was even more clueless about how to spell the word. Gu Xingyin looked up. Yun Qi saw that her eyes were full of smiles. I'm not angry or afraid. On the contrary, I'm very happy at this moment. Gu Xingyin looked at Yun Qi and smiled. She suddenly leaned close and stood on tiptoe to ask Yun Qi in his ear, "You just said that I'm your life. Is it true?" A smile suddenly appeared on Yun Qi's face. He lowered his head and they could smell each other's breaths. Looking at his little wife's sparkling eyes that were filled with expectation, Yun Qi felt that all his anger had turned into infinite tenderness. It's true. My Ruru is my life. Gu Xingyin's face blushed at a speed visible to the naked eye. This man's skill of sweet talking was getting more and more irresistible. Seeing Gu Xingyin like this, Yun Qi finally couldn't help laughing. Caihe, who was standing nearby, sighed in her heart. She was indeed the crown princess. Just now, His Highness the Crown Prince looked like he would pull out his sword and kill someone in the next second. But the Crown Princess had the ability to coax His Highness into laughing out loud with just a few words. Thinking of this, Caihe became happy again. She was the one who served the Crown Princess. The Crown Princess was loved by His Highness. If they served her like this, wouldn't they feel proud? Gu Xingyin and Yun Qi cuddled for a while before remembering to ask him, "Aren't you in the front? Why did you suddenly appear here?" The ministers would also come to congratulate the Empress, but they would not appear in the main hall of the imperial harem. Yun Qi coughed. "I just happened to pass by and saw you here, so I came to take a look." He would never admit that he was always paying attention to his wife's whereabouts. When he heard that the young miss of the left Prime Ministers Fu and the Crown Princess were in the Imperial Garden, he put down what he was doing and hurried over. He happened to hear Lu Shi's words that distorted the truth and made him burn with anger. Gu Xingyin was just asking casually. She didn't need a formal answer. She looked at their clothes and recalled the words she had kept in her heart. "Your clothes." Yun Qi lowered his head and looked at the clothes he was wearing that were obviously of the same style as Gu Xingyin's. He smiled. "I've heard that couples who are very close to each other will wear clothes made of the same material and style. This is called a couple's outfit." Gu Xingyin tried to suppress the smile that welled up in her heart. Couple's outfit, this kind of name that would only appear in modern society several thousand years later, was it born just like this? But she still dutifully asked in confusion, "Couple's outfit?" Yun Qi finally reacted. The word couple had not appeared even now. He forced himself to explain, "Couples who are very close to each other are called lovers." Gu Xingyin nodded. "Couples who are very close to each other." She repeated and secretly grabbed Yun Qi's hand through her sleeve. The two smiled at each other. Chapter 947. Lu Shi entered the main hall in a daze and was naturally seen by many people. But due to their face, most of the madams were only shocked in their hearts and pretended not to see it. Madame Lu looked at her daughter worriedly and hurriedly pulled her hand to ask, "What's wrong with she, her?" Lu Shi only shook her head and lowered her head without saying a word. For the rest of the time, Lu Shi sat obediently beside Madame Lu without saying a word. When the palace banquet was over, she followed Madame Lu back to her own carriage. Now that there were no outsiders, Madame Lu, who had been worried for a long time, pulled her daughter's hand and asked, "What's wrong with you?" Lu Shi's emotions that she had endured for an entire day finally collapsed at this moment. She threw herself into Madame Lu's arms and cried. This frightened Madame Lu. How many years had it been since Sheikher's incident? She had never cried so unscrupulously. Madame Lu only felt that her heart was about to break. After a long time, Lu Shi, who had cried to her heart's content, finally told Madame Lu about what happened during the day. Even Madame Lu took a while to recover from her shock after hearing such words. She looked at her daughter with a complicated expression. To be honest, if Lu Shi wasn't her daughter, she would definitely scold her for being an idiot. Asking the Crown Prince consort to let you and the Crown Prince be together in front of her. Mother. Seeing that Madame Lu didn't speak, Lu Shi dragged her voice and called her. Madame Lu was already thinking about how to apologize to the Crown Prince consort. The Crown Prince consort was the future mother of the nation and the Crown Prince loved her so much. If she didn't like the Lu family, Madame Lu simply didn't want to think about the consequences. And the Crown Prince, his impression of the Lu family now was probably not good. Madame Lu looked at her daughter with a headache. Her eyes were still filled with tears and she seemed to be very wronged. How did she raise such a daughter? When we return to the residence, I will properly teach you the rules. Madame Lu's expression turned cold. This daughter, if she didn't teach her well, she was afraid that she would cause a huge mess in the future. Lu Shi also knew that she might have caused trouble. Thinking of Yinqi's appearance during the day, she was scared to death and didn't dare to say anything. When Gu Xingyin heard that Lu Shi was grounded, she secretly thought that the left Prime Minister's wife was not stupid. Crown Princess Consort, the left Prime Minister's wife requests an audience. A palace maid's voice sounded. Putting a peeled lychee into her mouth, Gu Xingyin didn't even blink. Kai He, who was waiting on the side, said to the palace maid when she saw this, Her Highness the Crown Prince Consort is unable to see guests right now. Would the left Prime Minister's wife please go back? Outside the hall, Madame Lu's face finally darkened when she saw the gift being returned for the third time. Since that day, she had come to seek an audience with the Crown Prince Consort 3 times. Every time, the Eastern Palace's attitude was very clear. This also expressed the Crown Princess's position. She did not forgive Lu Shi for what she had done that day. Mrs. Lu sighed and got up to leave. The Emperor was in the Empress's palace. They had been watching the movements of the Lu mansion these days. As for Madame Lu's reason for doing so, the two of them were well aware of it. The Empress personally brewed a cup of tea for the Emperor. Madame Lu is a sensible person. It's just that your daughter's education is a little poor. The Empress said helplessly, My poor Chaohua. How long has it been since they got married? I see that this child's smile has lessened when she comes to greet me these 2 days. Chapter 948. Hearing this, the Emperor's face turned cold. The Crown Prince was his most important successor, and he had watched Su Chaohua, the Crown Princess, grow up. In the Emperor's heart, the person he liked was naturally the best and noblest person in the world. How dare a young lady from the left Prime Minister's residence come between them? The Emperor said, The left Prime Minister is a good official, but in terms of disciplining his children, he is really bad. I want to teach him a lesson. The Empress just smiled faintly. After the Emperor left, the Empress finally smiled. She had purposely brought up this matter in front of the Emperor. Otherwise, in this man's heart, such a small matter would not attract his attention. But her son, her daughter-in-law, had suffered so much for no reason, why should she let the instigator off? Another 2 months passed. The harem selection. It had been more than half a year since the Crown Prince's wedding. The Crown Princess was childless, and there were court officials who suggested that the Crown Prince take in a secondary concubine. Just 2 days ago, the Crown Prince and the Empress had both come to find the Emperor. Their meaning was that they were not in a hurry to take in a secondary concubine. Your Majesty, it has always been a taboo for the eldest son of a concubine to be weak. The Empress only said this one sentence. But it was also this sentence that made the Emperor remember how he had endured the humiliation under the pressure of his concubine brother and imperial father's favorite concubine. The dignified son of the Empress, in front of imperial father, was not as good as a concubine's son. Now, when he looked at the court officials who strongly suggested that the crown prince take in a secondary concubine, he was especially unhappy. He looked carefully and found that most of the court officials were from the left prime minister's side. Humph, the daughter of the left prime minister, was she the one who had improper thoughts about the crown prince? The crown prince and the crown princess are a harmonious couple, and their relationship is very deep. My dear officials, aren't you meddling too much? The emperor coldly threw down these words, ending this topic. 10 days later, an imperial edict caused chaos in the left prime minister's residence. By the will of the heavens, the emperor decrees, the daughter of the left prime minister, Lady Lu, is very beautiful and elegant, she will be conferred the title of concubine, by the emperor. The left prime minister who received the imperial edict sent the eunuch away in a daze. When he returned to his residence, he saw his daughter who had a face of resistance. What? Concubine of the emperor? I don't want to. I want to be a yunqi. Pa! Prime ministers couldn't bear it anymore. He raised his hand and slapped this daughter of his that he had always cherished. He looked coldly at Lu Shi. Concubine Duan, please be careful with your words. He emphasized the words concubine Duan. Concubines conferred by the emperor, even if they hadn't entered the palace, were already the emperor's women. The emperor's woman kept calling out the crown prince's name. Did she think that the lives of the people in the left prime minister's manor were too long? 10 days later, the new concubine Duan entered the palace. Central Palace. The empress raised her hand and looked at her newly dyed nails. She asked slowly, that person from the Lu family has entered the palace? The person beside her lowered his head submissively. Yes, your highness. The empress nodded, send someone to watch her carefully. Don't let her be blind and offend the crown prince and crown princess again. Yes. Gu Xingyin also knew that Lu Shi was conferred the title of Duan Pin. She was a little surprised. This could be considered to have completely deviated from the plot. After knowing that the emperor made this decision because he knew about the past between Lu Shi and the crown prince, she understood the emperor's idea. This was to make Lu Shi give up completely. Chapter 949. The concubines in the palace were originally very afraid of this concubine Duan. Among this batch of concubines who entered the palace, concubine Duan had the highest family background and the highest status. In these years, the emperor had rarely taken in high-ranking concubines into the palace. Most of them were young and beautiful, raised in the palace for novelty. This concubine Duan came out of nowhere, and many concubines regarded her as a great enemy. Your Highness, look, which one of us didn't slowly climb up from the lowest talent? This one from the left prime minister's manor. The empress took a sip of tea unhurriedly and gently put the teacup on the short table beside her, interrupting the words on the other side. This was a concubine who had been favored in the past 2 months. Obviously, she was worried that Lu Shi would affect her favor after entering the palace. The empress said slowly, thunder and rain are all the grace of the emperor. It's better not to guess the emperor's thoughts. The concubine's face turned pale. She knew that the empress was knocking on her head. She didn't dare to speak anymore and left after sitting for a while. The empress closed her eyes quietly as if nothing had happened. After half a month, everyone in the harem understood that the emperor definitely didn't confer this concubine Duan because he liked her. If he really liked her, how could he enter the palace for half a month without flipping the plate once? Since he didn't like her, why did he take her into the palace? No one could guess the emperor's thoughts on this question. Miss Lu Shi looked at her personal maid's embarrassed face and understood. Sure enough, looking at the half-dead dishes on the table, Lu Shi lowered her eyes. In the past half a month, she had almost tasted the coldness and warmth of human nature that she had not faced in more than 10 years. When she first entered the palace, the things she got in the palace were not the best, but only slightly inferior to those high-ranking concubines and favored concubines. There were often people who came to visit the palace where she lived. But seeing that the emperor never had the intention to come here, the palace gradually became quiet. Not only was it quiet, but even the daily rations and rewards in the palace were getting worse day by day. On the surface, there was no change, but on the inside, there was a world of difference. This was the harem. This was the difference between having a pet and not having one. When she first entered the palace, her heart was filled with endless resistance. She thought that if the emperor summoned her, she would find an excuse to refuse. But now, she had already begun to think of ways to gain his favor. The change in people's hearts only took half a month. Unfortunately, what Lu Shi didn't know was that from the moment the emperor issued that imperial edict, she was destined to never have the chance to be favored. That was just a punishment given to her for not knowing the immensity of heaven and earth. Spring passed and autumn came. A year passed. In the harem, there were countless new people entering, and many old people dimming in obscurity. Not many people remembered this concubine Duan who had almost no sense of existence. Lu Shi, who had not gone out for a long time, looked at the sunlight outside and had the rare thought of going out for a walk. At this hour, he shouldn't have met anyone, right? Living in the palace for a year had taught her how to keep a low profile. As she thought about it, she tidied up and walked out with her personal palace maid. Just as she walked to the imperial garden, Lu Shi saw a group of people on the opposite side. Chapter 950. She tactfully stopped in her tracks and planned to hide before the other party saw her. Although she didn't know who the person opposite her was, there weren't many people in the entire harem who could have that kind of power. It's the crown prince consort. The little girl beside her exclaimed in a small voice. Lu Shi, who was about to turn around, stopped in her tracks and looked over in a daze. Crown prince consort. Su Chaohua. Hearing this title again, she felt as if she had been cut off from the world for a lifetime. The last time they met, she still rushed to her and poured out her heart. What happened after that? After that, she was frightened by the furious crown prince. After that, it was the election and she entered the palace. She hadn't thought of the man who had touched her heart for more than 10 years. She didn't know what she was thinking, but she stopped in her tracks and stood there quietly until the person in front of her came closer. The person who walked to the front of the crowd and was surrounded by stars was indeed the crown prince consort, Su Chaohua. In a year, she was still so dazzling, but there was an additional layer of majesty on her. She was wearing a bright red robe embroidered with peacock patterns and the red gem in her hair was shining with a cold golden light. It was so magnificent that people didn't dare to look at her directly. She didn't know what kind of reaction she would have when she saw her. As Lu Shi thought this, when the person opposite her came in front of her, she quietly bowed and saluted. Your Highness, concubine Duan is in front. Concubine Duan. Gu Xingyin raised her brows. Wasn't it Lu Shi? Her gaze fell on Lu Shi. The other party was wearing an old light green dress and had plain features. There was only a 13 or 14-year-old girl following behind her. Looking at her, she knew that she didn't have a good year. Also, in a place like the palace where the strong stepped on the weak, how good could she, an unfavored concubine, live? No need for formalities. Lu Shi lowered her head and only felt the orderly footsteps walking past her, bringing along a fragrant wind. That woman didn't even pause for a moment. She raised her head and wanted to call out to Su Chaohua. She wanted to ask her if she had forgotten about her in just a year. This was something that Lu Shi could do in the past, but the current concubine Duan could only keep quiet. Your Highness the Crown Prince Consort is truly beautiful, he suddenly heard the little girl's exclamation. And it said that His Highness the Crown Prince and Her Highness the Crown Prince Consort have a very good relationship. Her Highness the Crown Prince Consort hasn't gotten pregnant in 2 years, but His Highness the Crown Prince has stood his ground and suppressed all the voices of him taking a secondary consort. As the servant girl spoke, she noticed that her master was looking at her. She suddenly realized something and her face flushed red. She knelt down and said, "Your Highness, please forgive me. This servant shouldn't have spoken out of turn. Even if concubine Duan was not favored, she was still her master. It was a simple matter to punish a little girl like her." However, Lu Shi was not in the mood to find trouble with a little girl at this time. She only said indifferently, "Remember to watch your mouth next time." After the group of people left, Lu Shi looked at the beautiful flowers in the garden. The sun was still so warm, but she no longer had the mood to enjoy the scenery. "Let's go back." She was the crown prince consort and was the only favorite in the East Palace. Since she entered the palace, she had never received any favor. Now, she and Su Chaohua were already people from two different worlds. Chapter 951. At night, Gu Xingyin was chatting with Yun Qi. In the bedroom, Gu Xingyin's hair had been untied. She was lying lazily on the floor reading a book. Yun Qi was soaking his feet on the chair next to her. "Ruru, what kind of book can be read during the day? If you read carefully, you will hurt your eyes," Yun Qi said to Gu Xingyin helplessly. Gu Xingyin looked up at him. "I will just read for a while." There was no one to serve them in the inner hall. So Yun Qi, the crown prince, dried his feet with a cloth towel and sat on the couch. He pulled Gu Xingyin into his arms. The two of them read the travel notes in Gu Xingyin's hands. "Right, I saw concubine Duan today." Gu Xingyin suddenly tilted her head and said. Yun Qi heard this unfamiliar name and paused. Concubine Duan. Seeing him like this, Gu Xingyin knew that he probably didn't know who concubine Duan was. She was in a very good mood and said with a smile, "The legitimate daughter of Prime Minister Hua, the one who entered the palace last year." When she said this, Yun Qi remembered. Wasn't she talking about Lu Shi? He didn't know why Gu Xingyin suddenly mentioned this. He frowned. "Since that time a year ago, I haven't seen her again." He lowered his head and saw Gu Xingyin smile that she didn't have time to withdraw. He immediately understood what was going on. He pretended to be angry, but his hands tightly locked her in his arms. "Well, you deliberately said it for me to hear." He moved his hand and pinched the soft flesh on Gu Xingyin's waist. "Ha ha ha, itchy," this was Gu Xingyin's Achilles heel. She couldn't bear it and hid in Yun Qi's arms. Yun Qi's heart was tied to her, and he was at the age where he was full of vigor. However, she was still twisting in his arms with her clothes untidy. The saints couldn't help but seduce him. Yun Qi naturally had a reaction. The two of them were husband and wife, so there was naturally nothing to hide. Gu Xingyin suddenly frowned and moaned when he pressed her down and his hand touched her smooth skin. This voice was not right. Yun Qi immediately stopped and asked, "What's wrong?" Gu Xingyin frowned as he felt a throbbing pain in his lower abdomen. She wasn't someone who didn't know anything about this. She already had a guess in her heart. However, he couldn't say it out loud. It wouldn't be good if he made her happy for nothing. She only said, "Maybe I ate something bad last night, so I feel a little uncomfortable." How could this be? Yun Qi had always held people in the palm of his hand and was afraid that he would use too much force. Hearing this, he immediately sent for an imperial physician. Upon hearing that the crown prince consort of the Eastern Palace was unwell, the imperial physicians on duty hurried over. "What do you think?" Yun Qi asked anxiously as he looked at the old master's thoughtful expression. The imperial physicians of the Imperial Physician Institute were indeed skilled, but their movements were so slow that it made one anxious. Finally, after frowning for a long time, a smile appeared on the imperial physician's face. "Congratulations, Your Highness the Crown Prince." "Congratulations, Your Highness the Crown Prince Consort." "Your Highness is rejoicing." The imperial physician hurriedly congratulated. "She's rejoicing?" Yun Qi's expression went blank for a second. Ever since Rura turned 18, there was no longer any problem with her body. He no longer ate those dishes. However, he didn't expect the good news to come so quickly. Reward. Yun-Chi said with an excited smile when he came back to his senses. The news that the Eastern Palace was rejoicing spread throughout the harem in less than 15 minutes. Chapter 952. Are you serious? The Empress had just finished washing up and hadn't rested yet. She was surprised and delighted when she heard the news. Replying to Your Majesty the Empress, many imperial physicians have confirmed that the Crown Princess is already a month pregnant. The eunuch who came to report the news respectfully replied. The Empress couldn't help but smile. She said, "Reward her well," she said to the people around her. The Empress stood up again. She didn't look as dignified as she usually did. She just murmured, "I have to see if there are any suitable things in the storeroom to nourish Chaohua's body. She is so young. She has to be careful with her first child. Why don't I go see her now?" Her aunt, who had served her for many years, didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Your Highness, you should rest now. I will go see for myself. If there is anything suitable, I will find it. As for you, the Crown Princess should be resting now. If you go, she will have to get up to welcome you." The Empress came back to her senses and said with a smile, "Look at me. I am so happy." She said with a smile, "Go and take a good look. Choose the best ones and send them to the East Palace." "Yes, I understand." The Empress sat down at the side and waited for her racing heartbeat to calm down. There was no news about the Crown Prince and Crown Princess's marriage for 2 years. She clapped her hands and told the Crown Princess not to be anxious every time this was mentioned. But how could she not be anxious? Seeing that the other princes' wives and concubines were all pregnant one after another, only the Eastern Palace did not have any news. Although the emperor didn't want the eldest concubine's son to be born before the legitimate one, it was better than nothing. If there was no news, she didn't know how long it could be delayed. Thank goodness, there was finally news from Chaohua. The Empress was overjoyed. The Emperor also got the news at about the same time. His reaction wasn't much worse than the Empress. He immediately ordered people to send countless precious herbs to the East Palace. The Empress Dowager's longevity palace didn't fall behind. Everyone paid enough attention to the Crown Prince's first child. In the Eastern Palace, Gu Xingyin had already been carefully helped onto a bed to rest. Yun-Chi sat on the edge of the bed with a silly smile on his face. He looked straight at Gu Xingyin and smiled. Gu Xingyin couldn't bear to look at the man's smile. If an outsider were to see this, who would dare to believe that this was the decisive Crown Prince? Yun-Chi was really happy. This was the first time he had become a father in 2 lifetimes. Moreover, it was a child that the woman he loved the most had given birth to for him. How could he not be happy? He held Gu Xingyin's hand. "Ruru, I'm so happy." Gu Xingyin was affected by his emotions and smiled unconsciously. "Well, I'm also very happy." Yun-Chi bent down. He was afraid that he would crush Gu Xingyin, so he purposely left a gap between the two of them. He gently planted a kiss on Gu Xingyin's forehead and gently tucked her hair behind her ear. His heart was at peace. Here was his beloved wife. He reached out and gently stroked Gu Xingyin's flat belly. Here was a child connected to his blood. Yun-Chi had never been so grateful to God. He was grateful to God for letting him come to this world. He was grateful to God for letting him meet her. Chapter 953. By the time Lu Shi received the news, it was already the next day. For a concubine like her, it was naturally impossible for someone to specially inform her that the Crown Princess was pregnant. The only reason she knew about this was because her servant girl had overheard the other servant girls in the palace discussing this matter when her servant girl had gone out. It should be said that the entire palace was discussing the crown princess pregnancy. She did not know how she felt when she heard this news. Perhaps she was a little disappointed. When someone was living a better life than you, it was easy to make you jealous. However, if that person was living a much better life than you, the difference between the two was like the difference between heaven and earth. That kind of unwillingness and jealousy would instead fade away. Su Chaohua felt this way for Lu Shi. But she never wanted Su Chaohua to live well. Even though she had already accepted her fate, Lu Shi always felt that if there was no Su Chaohua, then everything she had now would be hers. The Eastern Palace's exclusive favor, the noble status that all women in the world envied, could be hers. She used to have a reason to comfort herself. So what if Su Chaohua was favored? She was not pregnant for 2 years. No matter how much the crown prince loved her, he could not always guard her. One day, the crown prince would marry a concubine and have a child with another woman. But now, Su Chaohua was pregnant. She had all the glory and longing that a woman could think of. Her existence seemed to be born to make people jealous. Lu Shi thought blankly. If Su Chaohua was like this, then what about her? She looked up at the cold, empty, and damp palace. No one cared about it for many years. It was always dull and quiet. It was so dim that even the sunlight could not shine in. Whether it was the old furnishings or the numb expressions of the palace servants, it made people feel that this was a place to quietly wait for death. People here would feel that time was passing very slowly, but he himself was aging very quickly. It was only a year, but Lu Shi felt as if she had lived a lifetime. The Eastern Palace was completely different from this. The entire Eastern Palace was jubilant. Early in the morning, the Empress personally came to the Eastern Palace. She pulled Gu Shengyin, who stood up and bowed, and said angrily, "Why are you still talking about these empty formalities at this time? Take good care of the fetus and give birth to a healthy heir for the crown prince." Gu Shengyin could only smile and agree. When it was almost noon, the emperor and the crown prince came together. The Eastern Palace suddenly became very lively. The two most respected couples in the world had lunched together as if they were ordinary people. After lunch, the crown princess needed to rest according to the grand physician's instructions, so the emperor and empress left first. Gu Shengyin lay on the bed and looked at Yun Qi, who was about to leave. She suddenly wanted to act coquettishly. "Come and sleep with me," she said softly. Yun Qi said in surprise, "What's wrong? Can't sleep?" Gu Shengyin nodded seriously. "I want to sleep in your arms." The child also wants to sleep in his father's arms. Yun Qi couldn't help but laugh. His footsteps, which were originally about to return to the study, also turned back. He took off his shirt and got onto the bed quietly. Then, he pulled Gu Shengyin into his arms. The familiar lotus fragrance wafted into Gu Shengyin's nose, and a satisfied smile appeared on his face. Yun Qi lowered his head and kissed her forehead. Crown princess who loves to act coquettishly, quickly rest. Chapter 954. Gu Shengyin squeezed into Yun Qi's arms and closed her eyes in satisfaction. But after a while, she opened her eyes again. "Imperial father and imperial mother both hope that the child in my stomach is a boy. What if it's a girl?" Her large eyes blinked. From Yun Qi's angle, he could clearly see her long and curly eyelashes. She was thinking too much. Yun Qi couldn't help but laugh. But when he thought about it carefully, if there was a little girl who looked like Ruru and blinked her large eyes and looked at him, Yun Qi couldn't take it anymore. Just thinking about that scene made his heart melt into a puddle of water. "I like girls. Our daughter will definitely be like Ruru, the most beautiful little princess. I want to spoil her and make her the happiest princess in the world." Yun Qi's eyes revealed a trace of longing. Gu Shengyin stared at him for a while. After confirming that he was telling the truth, she nodded in satisfaction. Very good, he didn't have any preference for boys over girls. But, after thinking for a while, she was conflicted again. It would be best if this child was a boy. That way, no one would use the reason that the Eastern Palace had no heir to force Yunqi to take a secondary consort. What's more, those bastard brothers of his from another mother were eyeing him covetously. Although Yunqi never said anything in front of her, Gu Xingyin didn't need to think to know what kind of pressure he would have to face. Gu Xingyin didn't want him to work so hard. If this child was a boy, wouldn't Yunqi's pressure be much less? Pregnant people like to let their imaginations run wild. After thinking about it for a while, Gu Xingyin fell asleep in a daze. In her dream, there was a clear voice calling for her mother. Yunqi felt the breathing of the person in his arms gradually become longer. It was obvious that she had fallen asleep. He gently put her hand down from his waist and adjusted her sleeping position so that she could sleep more comfortably. Only then did he reluctantly let go of her. After putting on his clothes, Yunqi got out of bed. The tenderness that only belonged to that person on his face disappeared, and he became the awe-inspiring and unapproachable crown prince once again. Serve the crown prince consort well. Wake her up in an hour. She can't sleep for too long. Yunqi gave a few orders to his personal servants in a low voice before going to the study to deal with the unfinished business. Gu Xingyin was woken up by Caihe. There was no familiar embrace by her side. It was obvious that the man had left after she fell asleep. She sat up and allowed the palace maids to dress her up. She was supported by someone as she strolled slowly in the small garden of the Eastern Palace. The days passed peacefully and warmly. In the blink of an eye, several months had passed. During this time, concubine Duan asked to see Gu Xingyin several times. Gu Xingyin refused without hesitation every time. She was now pregnant with a child, and that Lu Shi, although Gu Xingyin was sure that she would not dare to have any ill intentions towards her. But that woman most likely did not have any good intentions towards her. Of course, she would not let anything that could threaten her get close. Her stomach was very big, and she would find it difficult to walk normally. The imperial physicians were even more careful in their care. They checked her pulse 3 times a day and did not dare to relax at all. When it snowed for the first time in winter, Gu Xingyin's stomach finally started to move. Yunqi stood outside the hall for an entire night. The first light of dawn shone on the glazed eaves of the Eastern Palace. It reflected a dazzling light on the thin layer of snow, causing his vision to blur. Clear cries came from inside the hall. Chapter 955. Yunqi's eyes widened a little. His numb body, which had stood for an entire night, moved a little and almost stumbled. A midwife happily walked out from the inner hall and gave him a joyful smile. "Congratulations, Your Highness the Crown Prince, it's a little imperial grandson. Both mother and child are safe." Yunqi's expression was a little dazed. He heard the midwife's words, but those words seemed to have no meaning in his ears. The only thing he was sure of was that the midwife's face lit up, which made him feel relieved. He lifted his leg and walked into the inner hall. However, before he entered, he heard a weak cry. There was clearly some commotion in the inner hall, and then someone walked out. Seeing him, they quickly bowed and couldn't hide the joy on their faces. "Congratulations, Your Highness the Crown Prince, Her Highness is pregnant with twins, a dragon and a phoenix." Yunqi reached out to push the midwife away and walked into the inner hall with a nervous expression. At this time, Gu Xingyin had just been helped to change her clothes. The palace servants were still tidying up, and the entire hall was filled with a strong smell of blood. Seeing Yunqi, the palace servants all bowed. Yunqi waved his hand and walked straight to Gu Xingyin's bed. She hadn't lost consciousness and was just lying on the bed. The hair in front of her forehead was wet with sweat. It was enough to imagine the pain she had just experienced. Yun Qi murmured, Ruru. Gu Shengyin slightly raised her head to look at him. She was really tired now. This kind of movement made her feel very exhausted. Yun Qi didn't say anything. He just reached his hand under the blanket and gently held her weak hand, calling out Ruru over and over again. The wet nurse who was taking care of the children looked at His Highness the Crown Prince with some emotion, her heart shocked. It wasn't the first time she saw a rich family's madam give birth. But this kind of situation was the first. She had given birth to twins, but the male master only had his mind on his wife. Those two children hadn't been looked at by their father even until now. As she watched, she felt a bit envious. She had seen a lot of things that happened in rich families. Among those couples, how many of them had true feelings for each other? This crown princess not only had a noble status, but even rarer was that she held His Highness the Crown Prince's unreserved sincerity. Indeed, there was no way to compare people to each other. The Eastern Palace gave birth to twins of a boy and a girl. The Empress was overjoyed. The Emperor personally bestowed names to his grandson and granddaughter. The boy was named Zhao and the girl was named Shi. In the royal court, no courtier dared to bring up the fact that the crown prince consort was childless. The birth of a dragon and phoenix was an extremely rare occasion of great joy. His Highness the Crown Prince had always loved the crown princess like a treasure. Now that the crown princess had just given birth to a child, who would dare to be so blind as to cause trouble? It was very lively outside. Lu Shi was lying on the bed. She was a little hot. A few days ago, during the heavy snow, the nobles in the palace were all praising the beauty of the snow scene and praising the emperor for his wisdom. The next year would definitely be a bumper harvest. Only her place was cold and damp because of the sudden drop in temperature and the lack of enough charcoal. In such weather, she unexpectedly caught a cold. But now, the entire palace was celebrating the joyous occasion in the Eastern Palace. All the imperial physicians in the Imperial Academy of Medicine were focused on the three noble masters. Who would pay attention to her, this little consort who wasn't favored and didn't have any sense of existence? The little girl went to beg for some, but unfortunately, it was like a cup of water on a burning cart of firewood. After a month, she couldn't even get out of bed. Chapter 956. Your Highness. The little girl raised the brazier in an attempt to warm up the cold hall. However, the poor quality of the charcoal fire made people want to cry. Lu Shi even felt that her breathing was a little irregular. The faint sound of music came from outside. Why is it so lively today? Lu Shi gasped and asked. The little girl wiped her eyes and replied, Today is the 1-month celebration of the 2 little imperial grandsons in the Eastern Palace. The Emperor and the Empress are holding a banquet for the officials. The little imperial grandson's 1-month celebration, Lu Shi thought absent-mindedly. In the past few months, she had not paid attention to the movements in the Eastern Palace for a long time. There was a commotion outside, and the little girl hurriedly went out. There was a faint voice outside, but Lu Shi could not hear it clearly. After a while, the little girl walked in happily, dragging something covered with a red cloth in her hand. She said happily, the imperial grandson's 1-month celebration, the Empress ordered the harem to give a big reward. This was just given. Lu Shi looked at the food and jewelry inside. It was not a very good thing, but it was rare for her now. After entering the palace for several years, she had not been favored. Her family seemed to be getting colder and colder to her. Her mother was thinking of her, but she was a woman with an external title. Unless they could find time to see each other, how could mother and daughter meet normally? Take it and use it. Lu Shi said. This little girl was the only one who was by his side now. The little girl was a little puzzled. Your Highness, these are all good things. This servant is not qualified to use them. Lu Shi smiled. I also have no use for them. Here, she did not see a single outsider all year round. What could she do with them? In the Eastern Palace, there were lanterns and colored banners everywhere. It was a joyous atmosphere. Gu Xingyin stood in the middle of the guests. She was holding the 1-month-old Yun Shi in her arms. Yun Zhao was being held by the wet nurse. The two little guys looked around with their identical big eyes. They were not afraid of strangers at all. "Give him to me." Yun Chi had just walked over and took his son, who was blowing bubbles, from the wet nurse's hands. When the madams at the side saw this scene, they were all astonished. People in the world paid particular attention to holding grandchildren and not children. Very few men would personally hold a child for fear of losing their dignity. But looking at the crown prince's practiced movements, it was obvious that he had hugged her many times. For a moment, many envious gazes flew towards the crown prince consort. Gu Xingyin did not have the time to pay attention to these gazes. She held her soft and fragrant daughter in her arms, and beside her were her beloved husband and son. This small area seemed to be isolated from the surroundings. The hustle and bustle around her had nothing to do with her. Only this corner, only her and the people around her were real. She raised her head and looked at Yun Chi with a smile. Yun Chi happened to lower his head and look at her. Their gazes locked in midair. Yun Chi suddenly lowered his head and whispered in her ear, "Let's raise Zhao, and Shi, well. We won't have other children in the future, okay?" After saying this, he realized that these words could easily cause misunderstandings. He hurriedly added, "I heard from the imperial physician that it is harmful for women to give birth. I only hope that you will be well. We will grow old together." A smile bloomed on Gu Xingyin's face. Okay. With a husband like this, what more could she ask for? Chapter 957. Lu Shi felt that she might not be able to survive this winter. The weather was too cold. The cold and damp wind came from the empty hall, from the windows that could not be tightly closed, from the slippery ground, from every corner, and surrounded her. Counting the days, it should be spring soon, right? It was a pity that she probably could not see the new branches of the willow tree outside. Lu Shi coughed, which was especially conspicuous in the empty hall. There was no one guarding at night, so the little girl was chased out by her to rest. Most people, at the last moment, would always feel a trace of kindness from the bottom of their hearts. The little girl was the last person by her side. With her current state, why should she torture her? In a daze, Lu Shi fell asleep in the stiff and cold quilt. She had a dream. In the dream, Lu Shi had a gentle and reserved smile on her face. She was wearing exquisite clothes that were not gorgeous, and she lived in a clean and warm hall. She also saw that man in her dream. When he looked at her, his eyes were filled with a gentle and warm smile. On countless nights, he held her hand and said, bear with it, bear with it. When I ascend the throne, I will definitely give you the most honorable position. She also saw Su Chaohua. She was a little different from what she saw. Although she was also the honorable crown princess, had the same appearance and role, and had a noble aura, it was still different from now. Without a child, there were countless concubines and concubines in the Eastern Palace. Although the crown prince respected them, he did not favor them alone. Behind Su Chaohua's pride and nobility during the day, she cried at the quilt every night and secretly asked the imperial physicians to take medicine to get pregnant. It was like she was watching a play. She watched Yunqi and herself put on a show in front of outsiders. She watched Su Chaohua being kept in the dark and only wanting to give birth to a child for her husband. Then, finally, the emperor passed away and a new emperor ascended the throne. After the new emperor ascended the throne and everything stabilized, the first thing he did was to disregard everyone's opposition and remove Su Chaohua from the position of empress. He also conferred himself the most honorable imperial noble consort after the empress. He also promised that once he had a child, he would immediately confer the title of empress. After that. She did not know what happened after that because she woke up from the dream. When she woke up, she was still in the dark and damp hall. The cold wind drilled into her quilt. Her entire body, from head to toe, even her heart, was cold. The more beautiful the dream was, the more cruel it would be after waking up. She could not help but cough twice, speechless for a long time. On the day of the beginning of spring, when the weeping willows in the palace pulled out new tender branches, the servant girl discovered that her master had already stopped breathing. Bury him. It's such a good day. What bad luck. The empress heard the servant's report. She didn't even lift her eyelids and said lightly. Gu Xingyin, who was playing with the two children in the palace, also heard the news. She was stunned for a moment, but soon after, her expression returned to normal as she shook the rattledrum in her hand. Those irrelevant people, regardless of life or death, had nothing to do with her life. Your Highness, His Highness saw this outside the palace today and ordered this lowly one to deliver it to you. Gu Xingyin opened the box. Inside were 4 lifelike sugar figurines, himself, and the 2 children. She held the box in her hand and turned back to look at her son and daughter who were hugging each other. Her heart was at peace. The years were peaceful and good. Chapter 958. Noble and happy for a lifetime. This was the best description of Empress Wen Su Chaohua's life. Emperor Zhao Yunqi was the only emperor in the 500 years of history of the Great Lai dynasty who never had a concubine. According to historical records, Emperor Zhao reigned for 20 years and passed the throne to his only son, Emperor Xian Yuan Zhao. After that, he and Empress Wen retired to the Nanshan Palace and lived happily. This pair of husband and wife also became the favorite subject of novels and television dramas in the future. When Gu Xingyin died, she was surrounded by the descendants of the royal family. Yuan Zhao, who was already the emperor, cried like a child in front of her. Don't cry, Zhao, I'm going to find your father. The retired emperor passed away a month ago. How could she let him wait for too long? Amidst the crying, she closed her eyes peacefully. When she opened her eyes again, she was on the big bed in the space. Ever since she mastered creation, Gu Xingyin made this space very comfortable. She would not let herself suffer. It was the same little kingfisher as before. This time, Gu Xingyin saw her stand up. She spread her little wings, but no matter how hard she tried, she could not bear the weight of her body. I'm still lacking a lot. In fact, Gu Xingyin already had a rough idea of her own ability. The stronger the soul, the stronger the perception of certain things. She already knew that she did not have the power to create a complete living thing, but she could not help but want to try. It was an expected failure. With a calm face, Gu Xingyin said, System, let's go to the next world. The system silently activated the soul transfer. It was oppressive, cramped, and suffocating. Gu Xingyin did not open her eyes. She could clearly see where she was. This used to be a magnificent temple. Why was it once? Because those dazzling reliefs had already lost their luster, the white jade flooring had even started to crack. Everything had lost its color. And she was the only person sitting on that high and mighty divine throne. No, it should be said that she was a god. He felt the power in his body. That weak but persistent flow was indeed genuine divine power. How could a god be in such a pitiful state? System, accept the plot. Memories flooded into her mind like a tidal wave. Gu Xingyin finally understood why this god had become like this. This was a Western fantasy world. Tens of thousands of years ago, it was the era when the gods flourished. At that time, people wholeheartedly believed in their gods. The gods also used their enormous power to protect their believers. The stronger the believer's faith, the stronger the god's power. The body that Gu Xingyin had transmigrated into was the goddess of nature, Katrina. The goddess of nature was one of the 5 main gods of the divine court. She was also one of the most powerful gods. Her believers were all over the continent, and her temples stood in every corner of the continent. But everything was changing. Humans are developing, and they are beginning to be dissatisfied with the status quo. As a result, more and more forests were cut down to build houses, and more rivers were filled up to make fertile fields. The goddess of nature's domain was reduced again and again, and her power was gradually weakening. The most frightening thing was faith. Humans no longer believed in gods. They felt that they could live well on their own. And because the gods were weak, they rarely appeared in front of people. Some people even began to question the existence of the gods. To the gods, this was simply a huge disaster. Chapter 959. Some of the weaker gods fell into a deep slumber as a result. Some could not even maintain their true spirits and directly dissipated between heaven and earth. Only the more powerful gods could still maintain their consciousness and true spirits. They persevered in the gods' court, waiting for the humans to wake up. As a powerful Lord God, although Katrina's power had been greatly weakened, she would not be fatally injured as a result. She would slowly guide her believers and shine the light of the goddess of nature on the continent again. She would rebuild the majestic and glorious God's palace on the continent. Unfortunately, before she could wait for her inheritor, she met someone. Among the humans, the group of people who were closest to gods were called oracles. They could listen to God's will and were responsible for spreading God's light to every inch of land. For tens of thousands of years, oracles had been the most honorable group of people on the continent. Even the emperor of the most powerful empire was a believer of God and dared not disrespect oracles. However, that glory was in the past. With the gradual collapse of faith, even the gods had lost their dignity, not to mention the oracles who relied on the gods to exist. The era where oracles of any god could be treated with respect by all the nobles and where oracles of Lord gods could even change the dynasty was over. Now, some oracles would even be questioned and ridiculed when they went out to reveal their identity. They did not even believe in gods, let alone oracles. The young oracles could only listen to the elders reminiscing about their former honor with yearning expressions in the dark night. After dawn, they would continue to face the cold reality. He was such an oracle. In other words, she was not considered an oracle. However, her physique was tested to have the potential to become an oracle. She was taken to the god's palace of a water god. That water god had long fallen due to the exhaustion of power. He agreed to become an oracle not because of her firm faith, but simply because her family was poor and the god's palace promised to provide her with food. Of course, it was impossible for He to listen to the teachings of any god. Every time, she would only put on an act and say some specious words to the only faithful believers in deep water. Seeing those believers respectfully believing her words without any hesitation, He laughed inwardly at their stupidity while disapproving of the so-called God. How could there be a God? If there really was a God, how could she just stand by and watch her followers being played like this? He's thoughts stopped the moment she heard Katrina's call. It was a call from the soul, a call from the goddess of nature. At that time, Katrina was preparing to find a new inheritor in the human world. She tried to summon an oracle who could resonate with her through divine telekinesis, and she happened to meet He. He was originally very afraid that the legendary goddess of nature would see through her thoughts. But at that time, Katrina was already in a weakened state and urgently needed to find a successor to spread the oracle on the continent. How could she have the time to investigate her soul? Moreover, the goddess of nature never believed that there would be anyone on the continent who could escape her faith. She was too conceited. Katrina had imparted countless spells and skills to He, making this oracle incredibly powerful. However, the gods didn't know that human desires could never be satisfied. Chapter 960. He became more and more powerful. She gained enough prestige and status in the human world. But her ambition also grew bigger and bigger. She began to be dissatisfied with the current situation. She was the one spreading the gospel of God, answering the questions of her believers, and inheriting the faith of the goddess of nature. But everyone only had eyes for the goddess of nature. Most of the power of faith from the believers flowed into the body of the goddess, and the oracle could only get a small part of it. But even this small portion was enough for He to gain a lot of benefits. He's strength had increased tremendously, but she was not satisfied. Just this small part of the power could increase her strength by so much. What if she could get more power of faith? Would she become even more powerful? But the power of faith that an oracle could get was always limited. The only ones who could really gain the most benefits were the gods. If He wanted to go further, a terrible thought began to cross her mind. It was only for a moment. He did not even dare to think about it a second time, because the gods could read the thoughts in the minds of her believers at any time. No matter how weak the goddess of nature was, she was not someone that an oracle like her could match. But she thought too much. The goddess of nature did not have the time to check her thoughts. She had never doubted the faith that humans had in her. Katrina's impression of humans was still at the time when the faith of the Lord God was at its strongest. At that time, even if the goddess of nature ordered a believer to die immediately, he would not even frown. He's ambition expanded infinitely under the continuous growth of her own strength and Katrina's indulgence. Finally, one day, He did the most heinous thing in the world: she killed a god. By the time someone realized that something was wrong, everything had already been settled. The goddess of nature, Katrina, who had dominated the holy court for hundreds of thousands of years, had fallen, and the new goddess of nature, He was born. None of the people on the continent knew what had happened. As a god who had become a human, He's thinking was completely different from that of a natural god. She knew that it was impossible to wait for the humans to wake up on their own. Any human who dared to offend the goddess of nature's territory would be mercilessly punished by the heavens. Under such circumstances, the reputation of the goddess of nature spread out. More and more humans became believers of this powerful goddess, and she became more and more powerful. Finally, one day, she suppressed the other four main gods and became the only supreme god of the celestial court. 10,000 years later, everyone believed in their one and only supreme god, He. No one knew that the one who had been silently protecting them for hundreds of thousands of years was the goddess of nature, Katrina. Gu Xingyin silently sorted out the plot in her mind and was a little speechless. She said, "System, are the gods in this world all otherworldly?" After reading the story, the goddess of nature, Katrina, was just a naive and sweet girl with a cold expression. The difference in strength between her and He was so great. Clearly, as long as she was a little wary, He could be crushed to death with a stretch of her hand. However, this really cold and pretentious sweet goddess was able to play such a good hand to such a state. The system was silent for a moment, probably trying to organize its words. Katrina isn't stupid, she's just too confident in her beliefs. Very few gods who had experienced the most powerful era of faith doubted that faith was not pure. Chapter 961. Gu Xingyin was silent for a bit, then said, "System, draw a skill." She prayed in her heart that she would be given a useful skill. After all, in the previous world, she had drawn a piano skill in the ancient world, so she didn't have the energy to complain. A white light flashed, and Gu Xingyin listened to the system's notification. A powerful self-healing ability of the blood race, able to drink blood and recover strength in a short period of time. Gu Xingyin read out loud. She was the goddess of nature, so why would she be given a blood race's ability? The system remained silent. Gu Xingyin comforted herself, "It's better than piano skills and cooking skills." After drawing the skill, she began to think about her current situation. Katrina was currently in a weakened state, so she needed to find an oracle to become her successor and spread her gospel across the continent. Actually, Gu Xingyin couldn't understand these gods. Even though he was already so weak, he still had to wait for an oracle to spread his faith. If she couldn't find one, she would continue to wait. Couldn't she spread it herself? When Gu Xingyin asked this question, the system remained silent. This was a question that even the system hadn't thought of, let alone the gods. The system replied, "The gods are of noble status, how could they do such a thing themselves?" Gu Xingyin sneered, "That's what I don't understand. You can't even maintain your true spirit, yet you're still not thinking of a way to spread your faith, but relying on the power of an oracle to spread your believers." Perhaps she wasn't a real god, so she couldn't understand the pride and nobility of these so-called gods. She only knew that she was here to complete a mission. As long as she could stop Hetty from becoming her oracle, prevent her from being killed, and spread the faith of the goddess of nature Katrina throughout the continent, her mission would be considered complete. As for the process, the laws of the world didn't stipulate that gods could only sit on their thrones and look up at the stars every day, right? The figure on the throne flickered and disappeared without a trace. At the same time, a green-robed woman with light blonde hair appeared in the hall. She wore a green leaf crown on her long hair, and her face was delicate and gentle, with a gentle smile on her lips. In her right hand, she held a magic wand that was about the same height as her. Paired with a dark cloak on top of the green robe, she looked exactly like the oracles recorded in the ancient books. "System, how is my appearance?" Gu Xingyin turned around and asked. The system replied honestly, "It's very deceiving." Gu Xingyin was speechless. He knew it wouldn't say anything nice. Also, what was deceiving? The goddess of nature had personally transformed into an oracle. Was there anything more realistic than this? However, the system's words' appearance. Gu Xingyin's lips curled into a mysterious smile. "Then let's set off and begin the journey of the goddess of nature's faith. With her, an omnipotent oracle, she would like to see what he, who was merely an oracle of a fallen god, could do." Lord Roy, that 9-colored deer ran into the green light forest. The mighty group of knights stopped outside a lush forest. Their prey had just escaped from here. The green light forest was the domain of the goddess of nature. It was said that the goddess of nature had once given an oracle that all creatures that entered the green light forest would be protected by her. Chapter 962. Unless they gave up on the hunt, they would have to enter this forest to continue chasing their prey. Lord Roy. All the knights looked at their master. After all, the green forest was the domain of the goddess of nature. The legends of the 5 main gods had lasted for tens of thousands of years on this continent. Even though humans no longer respected the gods as much as they did in the past, they still respected the goddess of nature from the bottom of their hearts. The leading knight was called Lord Roy. He had long golden hair that was as dazzling as the sun. It was carefully tied up and let down behind his head. His face was completely different from the color of his hair. His facial features were handsome and deep, but his sea-blue eyes were like the coldest gemstones, without a trace of warmth. He frowned and thought carefully. Finally, he spat out 2 words coldly, "Go in." This meant that they were going in to continue the hunt. One of the knights in the team hesitated, "But Lord, this is the domain of the goddess of nature." Roy coldly raised the corner of his lips, "The goddess of nature." Now, who has seen the descent of a god? Regardless of whether it existed or not, this was no longer their era. "I have." A soft voice was heard. This voice seemed to come from a very far place because it sounded faintly discernible in the eyes of the knights. However, she was clearly very close to them, so close that it was as if she was whispering in their ears. Roy's gaze swept in a certain direction like a sharp sword. Over there, where there was originally no one, a green figure slowly appeared. The nine-colored deer that they had not been able to catch after paying a huge price was lying docilely under her body. Oracle, Roy said with certainty as he looked at her attire. Gu Xingyin raised her head and looked at them. Her delicate facial features were fully displayed under the sunlight. She smiled and spread out her hands. Yes. The oracle of the goddess of nature, Bess, welcome to the green forest. The moment she spread out her hands, a breeze suddenly blew through the entire forest. Countless trees rustled and branches swayed, as if they were welcoming these uninvited guests with her words. Everything seemed very peaceful and beautiful. The knights in the team all grasped the weapons in their hands tightly. The sudden appearance of this person who claimed to be the oracle of the goddess of nature was too strange. Gu Xingyin didn't mind the silence. She knew that she was not the one who was anxious. They would speak eventually. Sure enough, after a short silence, Roy said, "Oracle of the goddess of nature, we need the nine-colored deer beside you." Gu Xingyin lowered her head and seemed to say something. Then she raised her head and said helplessly, "I just asked little Nine. He is not willing to leave with you." Roy frowned and said coldly, "Whether it's willing or not, I'm taking it away today." The rest of the knights gripped their weapons tightly. According to their experience, once the negotiations between the two sides broke down, it would be time for conflict. He didn't know what this strange and beautiful woman would do. To everyone's surprise, Gu Xingyin only smiled helplessly at their reaction. The goddess of nature treats all living beings equally. You want little Nine, is there a reason? Maybe I can help you. Chapter 963. Roy did not speak. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the woman in front of him with an inquisitive expression. Gu Xingyin still had her gentle smile as she waited for their next words. What broke the silence was a knight behind Roy. The knight was the one who had hesitated and said that this was the domain of the goddess of nature. Gu Xingyin could see traces of white faith power from him. Clearly, this knight was a person of faith. Your Excellency Roy, perhaps we can let this oracle give it a try. The knight looked at Roy with pleading eyes. His family had been believers of God since he was young. Although he did not believe in the goddess of nature, he still respected this powerful goddess very much in his heart. He did not want to see his group clash with the oracle of the goddess of nature. Roy frowned and looked at the green-robed oracle in front of him again. This woman always had a calm smile on her face, as though everything was under her control. He nodded imperceptibly. The knight understood what he meant, and a hint of joy appeared on his face. He walked toward Gu Xingyin and slowly explained the whole story to her. They were from the Roth Empire. This time, a plague suddenly broke out on a large scale in the Blue Sea province on the border of the Roth Empire, and many people died. The person in charge of the South Sea province tried everything but to no avail. In the end, he had no choice but to seek help from the Empire's headquarters. Unfortunately, the envoys sent by the Empire's capital were still unable to solve this problem. It was not until someone suggested that the legendary nine-colored deer of nature had the ability to expel all misfortune and plagues that they specially came to the vicinity of the green light forest to try their luck. After the knight finished speaking, he looked at Gu Xingyin sincerely. Your Excellency, we want this nine-colored deer not because of greed, and we won't harm it. His words disappeared under Gu Xingyin's knowing gaze. Gu Xingyin's gaze was still gentle, but her words left the knight speechless. The nine-colored deer is a symbol of auspiciousness and luck. Her blood is the most precious tonic. Little Nine went to a human city, can she really come back? Knight lowered his head in embarrassment. Indeed, a precious divine beast like the nine-colored deer was definitely a treasure in the human world. In particular, a drop of the nine-colored deer's blood could extend the lifespan of an ordinary person, and warriors and magicians could use it to reach a higher level. At that time, even if they wanted to protect the nine-colored deer, would they really be able to? Gu Xingyin spoke again, it's just a few small plagues. I can go with you to take a look. The knight was overjoyed, but before he could say anything, Roy, who had been sitting on the horse, said in a cold tone, "Can you guarantee to solve the problem of the Ocean Blue Province?" Gu Xingyin didn't get angry when she heard this obvious question. Instead, she smiled and said, "Whether or not I can solve it, you will see the effect later. But I can be sure that little Nine has no way to solve the problem you are talking about." The nine-colored deer was only an auspicious beast. It was true that it could purify misfortune and plagues, but if it was man-made dark magic, the nine-colored deer could not do anything. Chapter 964. As if responding to Gu Xingyin's words, as soon as she finished speaking, the nine-colored deer that had been docile beside her raised its head and cried out. Gu Xingyin was certain that what happened in the Aquamarine province was definitely not as simple as a natural plague. Because she felt a familiar power. Roy stared at Gu Xingyin and finally said, "I hope you can do what you said." Gu Xingyin answered him with a smile. The knights prepared a horse for her, but Gu Xingyin did not move. She stood in place and said with a calm expression, "As the messenger of the goddess of nature, I promise to help you solve your predicament. Don't you need to do something?" Roy paused and immediately said, "As long as you can successfully solve the problem of the Aquamarine province, I will naturally report your achievements to His Majesty the Emperor. At that time, I can fight for whatever reward you want." He didn't know why, but a wave of disappointment suddenly welled up in his heart. He felt that this person should not be so unscrupulous. Gu Xingyin shook her head. The eyes of the goddess of nature looked to every corner of the continent. "If you need her help, you should pray." The eyes of the knight who had been standing beside her lit up. He suddenly clasped his hands in front of his forehead and chanted in a low voice. This was the oldest prayer chant that had been passed down from 10,000 years ago. Everyone would be taught this prayer after they were born, but now, except for the truly devout believers, very few people would really use it. This knight was obviously a loyal believer. Gu Xingyin could feel a trace of almost imperceptible energy being transmitted from the knight's body and pouring into her body. Although she only felt her body warm up slightly, it was not even comparable to the bright sunlight. But at least it proved that the power of faith was effective for her. Gu Xingyin looked at him with satisfaction and then looked at the others. Roy said in a deep voice, "We are not believers of the goddess of nature." Gu Xingyin interrupted him. "I don't need your faith, but there's no problem in asking for the help of the goddess of nature. It's a prayer that doesn't waste much energy, right? Even if you ask others for help, you still need to thank them," Gu Xingyin said in a light tone. When they thought about it, they felt that it made sense. She did not ask for anything excessive, so they just treated it as asking for her help. Gu Xingyin was in a good mood as she watched the knights finish their prayers one by one. She rejected the horses they offered to her and sat lightly on the back of the nine-colored deer. "The knights, since you want to sit on the nine-colored deer to go to the Aquamarine province, why did you say so much before?" The devout knight clearly had a good impression of Gu Xingyin. He looked at the eye-catching nine-colored deer worriedly. "Oracle, I'm afraid it's not appropriate for you to take the nine-colored deer to a human city." Gu Xingyin looked at him with a smile. "Don't worry. With me here, no one can have any ideas about little Nine." She still had that indifferent expression on her face and that gentle smile on her face. But the moment she said this, the knight clearly felt an indescribable arrogance from her. Since Gu Xingyin said so, the knight did not say anything else and just followed behind her dutifully. Roy, on the other hand, looked at Gu Xingyin thoughtfully before leaving. Chapter 965. Gu Xingyin, who was riding a nine-colored deer, unsurprisingly received the attention of countless people. Among those gazes, there was curiosity, shock, surprise, and greed. Gu Xingyin did not seem to see them as she followed the knights all the way to the border of the Aquamarine province. As soon as she entered the Aquamarine province, Gu Xingyin became certain. Her guess was right. This incident was not a natural disaster at all, but a man-made one. Roy's attention had always been on this strange oracle. Seeing her strange expression, he asked, "How do you feel?" Gu Xingyin met his dark blue eyes and said with a smile, "I think I can solve the problem here." Roy raised his eyebrows and did not say anything. "She's so sure." Ever since a large number of infected casualties appeared in the Aquamarine province, the person in charge here had thought of all the ways he could think of, including asking an oracle to pray for the blessings of the gods. But if an oracle was useful, he would not have specially come here from the imperial capital. Whether this person could do it or not, it was better to let the facts speak for themselves. Gu Xingyin knew that the other party did not trust her, but she did not mind this. What she needed the most now was not his trust at all. The situation in the Aquamarine province was very grim, so Roy did not delay at all and directly invited her to the city lord's mansion in Aquamarine City. Hearing that she was someone who could solve the plague in the Aquamarine province, the city lord looked at Gu Xingyin with tears in his eyes. During this period of time, he was simply worried sick about this matter. Even his hair had turned white by quite a bit. Originally, with his qualifications, he had stayed here for long enough. Once he successfully survived this period, he would definitely be transferred back to the imperial capital in the future, and his future path would definitely be smooth. But he just had to encounter this matter. If he could not solve it successfully, not to mention being transferred back to the imperial capital for a promotion, he might not even be able to keep his life. Gu Xingyin also knew that this matter could not be delayed. She quickly explained what she needed. "That's all?" the city lord asked suspiciously. "That's all." Gu Xingyin nodded. She looked at the Aquamarine city lord and said, "What I can guarantee is that I will solve the Aquamarine province's predicament when you prepare the things I want according to my requirements." Her calm demeanor calmed the lord of Aquamarine City, who had been hesitating for a long time. "All right, Lord Oracle, I'll do as you say as soon as possible." The lord of Aquamarine City ordered his men to bring Gu Xingyin to a good guest room and left in a hurry. Gu Xingyin gently stroked the nine-colored deer's smooth fur, while thinking about the ocean blue province. From the moment she entered, she felt an extremely familiar yet annoying power. Hemas, the god of darkness. As one of the 5 main gods, Hermos was different from the other 4 main gods. He had never been favored by humans. His believers were all abyssal demons from the other side of the continent. As humans grew stronger and stronger, the abyssal demons were expelled, and Hermos became the first of the main gods to fall into a deep slumber. She was certain that this matter had nothing to do with Hermos. It must have been some humans who had obtained the inheritance of the god of darkness, but were unable to control such a large amount of dark power, resulting in such serious consequences. Gu Xingyin could have quietly expelled the power of darkness from his body. But how could she give up such a good opportunity to develop her faith? Chapter 966. Gu Xingyin's mind was going through a series of steps to develop faith, when a maid from the city lord's mansion knocked on the door. "Lord Oracle, someone is looking for you." That maid's attitude towards Gu Xingyin was very respectful. "Let her in." Gu Xingyin already knew who it was. She never thought that her first meeting with He Di would be under such circumstances. He Di originally planned to leave the city lord's mansion today. She was forcibly invited by the city lord's mansion to solve the problem of the Aquamarine province. But her title as an oracle was fake, so how could she solve the problem? He Di could only act like a duck on a perch and pretend to contact the gods. The consequences could be imagined. Fortunately, the city lord of the Aquamarine province was not a murderous person, and he had invited many people, but no one could do anything about it, so he did not blame He Di. Today, when He Di was about to leave, she heard the 2 maids quietly talking, saying that those powerful Sir Knights had invited a Sir Oracle over, saying that she could solve the current predicament of the Aquamarine province. Sir Knight? He knew who they were talking about as soon as she heard it. Speaking of which, she was invited here after all, so she enjoyed the treatment of a VIP in the City Lord's mansion. Everyone in the City Lord's mansion, from the maids to the City Lord himself, treated her politely. Only that group of knights, who were said to have come from the imperial capital, were not polite to her at all. Especially the leader, although he admitted that he was very handsome, his temper was as cold as his handsomeness. Someone like him would invite people. He was very curious about that mysterious oracle, so before leaving the City Lord's mansion, she specially prepared to come and see for herself. She was brought in by the maid. At first glance, she was attracted by the 9-colored deer standing quietly on the side. This mythical beast that existed in legends had a smooth and elegant posture, and the flower-like antlers on the top of its head were gorgeous. Standing there, it seemed to be glowing. The legendary 9-colored deer. A 9-colored deer that could extend one's life by 10 years just by drinking a mouthful of blood. He's gaze unconsciously became hot. She almost couldn't help but want to go closer. Fortunately, her rationality told her that there was another person here. Gu Xingyin was originally sitting sideways, but when she saw her, she turned around. Hello. Gu Xingyin didn't get up. She just nodded slightly in greeting. No one thought that her action was impolite. Even he felt that this woman was born to sit elegantly like this. There was nothing in the world that was worthy of her bending over. Hello. For some reason, he was inexplicably nervous when she was looked at by that pair of penetrating and gentle eyes. She even began to stutter when she spoke. Gu Xingyin's enormous divine spirit power swept past he in an instant, but no one noticed it. As expected, this woman only had the name of an oracle. She didn't have any faith on her at all, nor was there any mark left by the gods. Gu Xingyin looked over with a questioning look in his eyes. For some reason, He's ability to speak eloquently didn't work at all in front of Gu Xingyin. Her face flushed red, and she finally found an excuse. I heard that a new oracle came to the City Lord's mansion, so I wanted to come over and pay my respects. What was wrong with her today? Why was she so abnormal? A smile flashed across Gu Xingyin's eyes. He's abnormal behavior was of course because she secretly used a trace of divine power when she looked at her. It wasn't easy to lie in front of the gods. Chapter 967. He finally left the City Lord's mansion in a sorry state. The person in front of her did not do anything, but she felt that she had no reservations in front of her. Even the deepest secret in her heart was seen through at a glance. This should be an illusion. But this illusion was so real that it made her feel uneasy. Her vision told her that she should stay away from that woman. Gu Xingyin watched He leave with a smile on her face. The most important thing for her now was to recover her divine power and gather faith as soon as possible. As for He, she was just an ordinary human. Without Katrina's unconditional indulgence, she could not make any waves at all. The City Lord's mansion acted quickly. After resting for a night, when Gu Xingyin woke up the next day, the City Lord was already waiting outside. Lord Oracle, everything you want has been prepared. The City Lord saw her with a hint of eagerness in his eyes. The City Lord is kind-hearted. Gu Xingyin saw the red veins in the City Lord's eyes and knew that he had not slept all night. She moved the magic wand in her hand gently, and a gentle energy was transmitted to the City Lord's body. The City Lord felt comfortable all over, and the fatigue from staying up all night disappeared without a trace. Thank you, Lord Oracle. The City Lord thanked her sincerely. Gu Xingyin returned a smile. As the two spoke, they arrived at their destination. It was just a tall building. Because they were in a hurry, the materials used were the easiest to collect wood. There were 999 steps leading up, and at the top was a high platform. Gu Xingyin's destination. I'll have to trouble the city lord to wait for me here. Gu Xingyin finished speaking and slowly walked up the steps. Her steps were very leisurely, but not slow at all. In the blink of an eye, she reached the highest point. This place was completely empty. There was nothing here. The city lord stood below nervously. He did not know what the other party was up to, nor did he know if she could really solve the current predicament of Aquamarine City as she said. Footsteps came from behind. It was Roy, who had heard the news. A gentle wind blew towards Gu Xingyin from high above, causing her wide sleeves to flutter, as if she was about to be blown away by the wind. Gu Xingyin closed her eyes and raised her wand high up in the air. Then, she slowly and softly chanted an incantation. Her voice was soft and gentle, and she was standing at such a high place. Logically speaking, the beauty should be able to hear her. But the city lord of Aquamarine, who was standing under the tall building, heard it. Roy heard it. The attendants in the city lord's mansion heard it. All the people of the entire Aquamarine province heard this beautiful chant that sounded like a song. No one could understand what was being sung, but everyone knew that this strange melody was praising the great goddess of nature. On the high platform where no one could see clearly, with Gu Xingyin as the center, a circular magic circle with a diameter of 10 meters suddenly formed. The light from the complex pattern even covered the bright sky. Gu Xingyin's chanting grew louder. Gradually, it spread from everyone's ears to the wind, the streets, the sky, and every corner of the Aquamarine province. Following the transmission of this voice, a faint green light was born from the air. It was omnipresent and quietly flowed past everyone's body. Chapter 968. Those who were not infected by the power of darkness only felt refreshed after the green light passed through their bodies. As for the others, they only felt that the pain and torture that had been plaguing their bodies for countless days and nights seemed to be pulled out of their bodies by something invisible, and infinite strength grew from inside their bodies. The chanting continued. People slowly stopped what they were doing, as if they had received a mysterious summon in their minds. Without anyone teaching them, they began to clasp their hands together and press them against their foreheads. Following the mysterious chanting, they began to sing praises. Thank you, beautiful and benevolent goddess of nature, for passing the power of life to me. Flowers and green leaves are your hair crown, and the gurgling clear stream is your bright gaze. Roy looked back. More than half of the people around him began to sing the praises of the goddess of nature. Even the city lord of Aquamarine did not avoid it. His gaze as he looked at the high platform suddenly became unfathomable. If such a powerful infectious ability was used in other aspects, Gu Xingyin felt countless faith power pouring into her body from all directions, allowing her body, which had just overdrawn from using magic, to quickly recover its strength. She watched with satisfaction as the invisible black mist was swallowed by the green light and disappeared without a trace. Half an hour later, the city lord of Aquamarine saw Gu Xingyin walking down from the high platform. She still had that gentle look on her face, but the way everyone looked at her had changed. There was even a fanatical light in some people's eyes. Your Excellency, the goddess of nature is really. The city lord of Aquamarine's eyes were filled with amazement. He was a person who did not believe in gods, but the scene he saw today was too unbelievable. Gu Xingyin smiled mysteriously. The goddess of nature has always been looking at everyone with her eyes. As if responding to her words, the moment she finished speaking, all the flowers in the city lord's mansion that were out of season bloomed at the same time. At the same time, an excited guard came to report the good news. Your Excellency, all the people infected by the plague in the city have recovered. The news from the other cities did not arrive so quickly, but the mayor of Aquamarine City did not doubt that the news would be good. He suddenly bent his waist and bowed solemnly to Gu Xingyin. The people of the entire Aquamarine province are grateful for your help, goddess of nature's oracle, Lady Bizi. Gu Xingyin accepted his bow and made a small request. I have no other wish in my life. I only wish to see the believers of the goddess of nature spread to every corner of the continent, just like the glorious era 10,000 years ago. The mayor of Aquamarine City immediately understood what she meant. His heart was filled with respect for such a devout believer. The goddess of nature is a great deity. I believe that the new people of Heilong will not reject the protection of such a powerful and benevolent deity. In the mind of the Lord of Aquamarine, he had long regarded this mysterious oracle as a powerful and somewhat loyal believer of the goddess of nature. He even suddenly felt that it was appropriate to have some faith. He didn't know that this mysterious and powerful believer was communicating with an invisible creature. System, how was my performance just now? The system replied, very good. You have the demeanor of a quack. Chapter 969. He was in Aquamarine City. Because she had the qualifications to become an oracle, she could see the source of the plague that plagued humans, which was the black fog. She listened to the sacred chanting and watched as the green light spots appeared out of thin air and swallowed up the black fog that everyone was helpless against. He only felt that her understanding had been overturned. Even when she was taken away by a mysterious person and later inexplicably became the oracle of the water god, He had never had any faith in her heart. She also did not believe that there were gods in this world. But the scene that she saw today was too unbelievable. Other than gods, which human would have such powerful and magical power? Was there really a god? Then, as an oracle, would she be as powerful as that mysterious woman one day? She suddenly felt a fire in her heart. Her eyes focused and she headed toward the city lord's residence. Gu Xingyin was still in the city lord's residence. She's here again. Gu Xingyin felt a little strange. Her last meeting with He was not a pleasant one. Why did she come again? How to become powerful? Gu Xingyin looked at He with an unfathomable expression. He felt a little creeped out by this look. She had a bad premonition in her heart. It made her want to stop the person opposite her from speaking. But Gu Xingyin had already said it. The source of an oracle's power is their faith and the power of the gods. I don't feel any faith in you. I'm very curious how you became an oracle. Gu Xingyin looked at her with a serious expression. As soon as she said this, everyone looked at He differently. An oracle without faith. This was simply the biggest joke of all. No one doubted Gu Xingyin's words because she had just proven herself with her actions. He wanted to defend herself, but the feeling from last time appeared again. In front of this mysterious woman, she had nowhere to hide. Even the slightest lie had become abnormally difficult for her to speak. In the end, He couldn't stand the suspicious and disgusted gazes of the people around her. She covered her face and left hatefully. Gu Xingyin stayed in the city lord's mansion for another 3 days. Over the past 3 days, many people from Aquamarine City had come to visit her and ask her about the goddess of nature. She could clearly feel that many people in the Aquamarine province had begun to believe in the existence of the goddess of nature under her influence. She was very happy and was very patient with the people. After all, they were her believers. In the eyes of the city lord of Aquamarine, Roy, and the others, she looked even more like a person who believed wholeheartedly. The city lord of Aquamarine City had even begun preparations for the construction of the first goddess of nature temple. Many of the citizens expressed their willingness to help. On a sunny afternoon, Gu Xingyin welcomed a guest. Go to the imperial capital. Gu Xingyin looked at Roy in surprise. This man's eyes were as cold as ever. Roy nodded and said his purpose without hesitation, I want to cooperate with you. He looked straight at Gu Xingyin. I can provide you with convenience and develop believers. You need to help me get more people support. He had seen everything that Gu Xingyin had done in the past few days. He knew what the other party wanted. Therefore, as soon as he opened his mouth, it was difficult for others to refuse. Chapter 970. Gu Xingyin was silent for a while. Roy was not in a hurry. He waited for Gu Xingyin to consider. Gu Xingyin looked up and smiled at Roy. Since you want to cooperate, I think you need to be more honest. What do you think? Archduke Roy. Roy's expression did not change, but his pupils shrank. How did you know? His identity had been concealed very well ever since he left the capital. He was certain that he did not give himself away at all. Gu Xingyin smiled. I said a long time ago that the eyes of the goddess of nature can see everything in the world that she wants to see. Roy did not comment on her words. He suddenly asked, speaking of honesty, let me ask you something. Please answer me honestly, do gods really exist? This was also a question that countless people in this era were puzzled by. The glorious era of the gods had long passed, and no one on this continent had seen the gods descend for thousands of years. They could only see the records of the gods in the historical books. No one was sure whether it was true or just the imagination of their predecessors. Gu Xingyin suddenly looked into his eyes. Roy was taken aback. The next moment, he felt as though his consciousness had been pulled into an empty space. Light condensed in front of him, gradually forming a vague human figure. The figure's face could not be seen clearly, but from Roy's angle, he could see a gorgeous crown on her long golden hair and a golden scepter in her hand. Under the cover of the hazy divine light, Roy could only see that her exposed robe was embroidered with emerald-like green leaf patterns. You want to see me? An ethereal voice sounded in this space. Before Roy could speak, his vision suddenly turned black. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself still sitting on the chair in the Aquamarine City Lord's residence. Opposite him was Gu Xingyin, who was looking at him with a smile. Roy picked up the cup of tea beside him and took a sip to hide his desire. His hands trembled slightly, and fine cold sweat broke out on his back. That feeling just now, it was as if he was just a speck of dust, and in front of him was a towering mountain. How shocking! It was too terrifying. He did not want to experience such a feeling again in his life. Do you have an answer now? Gu Xingyin asked. Lloyd nodded. He didn't have the slightest doubt. Other than the gods, who else could give him such a feeling? The two of them chatted for a long time in the room in the afternoon. For the next half a month, Gu Xingyin stayed in Aquamarine City until the first Goddess of Nature temple was built. On that day, thousands of believers went to the Goddess of Nature's temple to pray. Gu Xingyin personally led the group prayer. On that day, after all the believers had finished their prayers, they found a green leaf that would never wither in front of them. This green leaf could protect them from accidents and diseases. This was a gift from the Goddess of Nature to her devout believers. Gu Xingyin also found an oracle from the crowd who believed in the Goddess of Nature and made her the manager of the Goddess of Nature's temple in Aquamarine City. After everything in Aquamarine City was over, Gu Xingyin bid farewell to the reluctant citizens of Aquamarine City. Riding a 9-colored deer, she followed the knights from the imperial capital and went to the most prosperous place in the Roth Empire. Chapter 971. Since Gu Xingyin already knew his identity, Lloyd did not stop her. After half a month, the group finally arrived at the most prosperous city of the Roth Empire, St. Vitus. This city was named after the first emperor of the Roth Empire. Under the curious gazes of countless people, the first thing Gu Xingyin did after entering the city was to close her eyes and carefully feel the faint aura flowing in the air. This city had almost completely lost its faith. She opened her eyes and looked at the knight beside her. Does the Roth Empire believe in the god of war? That knight's name was Louis Wise Kapner. Since he was able to follow Grand Duke Royd, he naturally couldn't be a nobody. In fact, in terms of title, he was also a count. Hearing Gu Xingyin's question, Louis nodded, yes, our Roth Empire's guardian god is the god of war. But... a trace of sadness flashed through his eyes. But now, there were not many people left who still believed in the god of war. Even among the upper nobles, there were only 2 or 3 families left that still worshipped the god of war, not to mention the ordinary people. He did not even know how long his family could hold on. His family had always believed in the god of war because the Kapuna family had always been the family with the most oracles in the Roth Empire. Before the Age of Glory, the Kapuna family's glory was even greater than that of the royal family. But now, it had been many years since the oracles of the Kapuna family had been able to listen to the god of war's oracles. They were incomparably terrified. Whether it was the fall of the god of war or the god of war giving up on the Roth Empire, they could not accept it. Gu Xingyin understood Kapuna's unfinished words. In fact, after recognizing the faint remnants of faith in this city, she had already guessed the result. Although the god of war was a powerful god, after losing his faith, he had no choice but to fall into a deep sleep. Now, the only gods that still had a trace of consciousness were the goddess of nature Katrina, the god of light Olus, and the god of sky Uno. Even among the 5 prime gods, the god of darkness and the goddess of earth had fallen into a deep slumber. He did not know what the other 2 main gods were doing. Even Gu Xingyin could not detect their whereabouts. She comforted Louis. Although our beliefs are different, those who persist in their beliefs will eventually receive the care of the gods. Louis smiled gratefully at her. He had met countless people who didn't understand the Kapuna family. Even he himself was often mocked for believing in the god of war. Louisville's faith would never be shaken by such gossip, but when he heard Gu Xingyin's encouragement, his eyes lit up for a moment. He looked at Gu Xingyin with a burning gaze. Thank you for your blessings, Master by Sea. The Karpner family will never give up on their beliefs. Even he himself did not realize that when he looked at the oracle of the goddess of nature, there was a burning emotion hidden in his gaze. Lloyd saw it. He subconsciously frowned. This oracle of the goddess of nature was destined to walk a lonely path in the future. He did not want his capable subordinates to have too much involvement with her. Chapter 972. Royd brought Gu Xingyin to his duke's mansion. She was clearly dressed as an oracle, and she was a very beautiful woman. This woman was even riding the legendary 9-colored deer. She was brought into the duke's mansion by Grand Duke Royd, who had never been close to women. No matter which one it was enough to attract the attention of countless people. And when all this information was put together, it was enough to make the citizens of St. Vitus curious. Your identity is not ordinary, I will introduce you to His Majesty. You have to know that the path you're about to take is not suitable for you to get too close to men, Lloyd said to Gu Xingyin with a serious expression. His identity was very prominent. He was the younger brother of the Emperor of the Roth Empire, a Grand Duke who owned a large amount of territory in the south. In the eyes of outsiders, Royd was infinitely powerful, but few could see the danger he was in. His elder brother, the Emperor of the Roth Empire, was a lecherous and incompetent man. He was interested in women, but other than that, he didn't know anything about politics. He ruled the Roth Empire into a mess. His favored subjects controlled the government, and the talents of the truly knowledgeable were buried. The Roth Empire's strength had been declining in recent years. None of the princes under the emperor had any talent. Each of them fought fiercely for their own power, but none of them put any thought into governing the country. The emperor of the Roth Empire didn't have any objections to this, but he was very wary of his only brother, Royd. He didn't get the throne in a good way, so in his heart, he always felt that his younger brother was still unwilling to give up on the throne. One day, he would lead the army in his territory to take back what was rightfully his. In these years, Royd was very careful, not letting the emperor know anything that could be used against him. Of course, he wasn't willing to give up. If his brother was a truly capable person, then he could still tolerate it. But his brother was an idiot who didn't know anything other than pleasure and women. This idiot even wanted his life at all times. How could he endure this? He was an ambitious man, and naturally had a great desire for power. Under all these temptations, what Royd wanted was obvious. The most supreme position in the Roth Empire. But in this country, the emperor was very powerful. The people were also very loyal to the imperial power. Not to mention that the army in his territory might not be able to compete with the empire's army. Even if he won, the empire's people might not be able to accept him as a usurper monarch. Therefore, he needed someone who could grasp the hearts of the people and turn everything that was disadvantageous to him to his advantage. Then, Gu Xingyin appeared. Faith was often the thing that ruled the mind the most. Gu Xingyin froze when she heard Lloyd's words. What did he mean? Looking at Lloyd's cold expression, which didn't seem to have any intention of explaining, she frowned and thought for a moment before realizing that he was talking about Louis. Glancing at Lloyd, Gu Xingyin looked helpless. Don't worry, I don't have any other thoughts about that child with such a firm belief. I just admire his loyalty. Lloyd raised his eyebrows, thinking, you don't have any other intentions, but it's obvious that she doesn't think so. Also, what did a little kid mean? He glanced at Gu Xingyin's young and beautiful face. His lips moved, but he didn't say anything. Chapter 973. Grand Duke Royd brought Gu Xingyin to meet his elder brother, the Emperor of the Roth Empire, Phoebe. Phoebe was taking in several beautiful concubines and was intoxicated by the warmth and tenderness. When he heard that his younger brother was looking for him, he was very impatient. In his eyes, his younger brother Royd represented trouble. But in order to show his benevolence, he couldn't refuse his younger brother, the Duke of the Empire. When Royd walked into the hall, he saw his elder brother looking at him with a loving smile. My dear brother Royd, why are you looking for me? Phoebe asked with a smile. The expression on Royd's face didn't loosen at all because the other party was the emperor. He bowed and said, Your Majesty, I met a very mysterious oracle during my trip to the Blue Ocean province. I don't believe in gods, but I thought you would be very interested. Oracle. Sure enough, Phoebe's eyes lit up when he heard this. But he quickly put on a casual look and said, Oh, is that so? I remember you don't like this kind of person. Royd frowned, Yes, I don't believe in these people who pretend to be gods. But this oracle seems to be very capable. I think it's necessary for you to meet her. Emperor Phoebe looked at Royd seriously and found that when the other party talked about the oracle, his eyes were trying to hide it, but there was still a trace of disgust and disapproval. Instead, he felt relieved. He understood his younger brother. He had always been very repulsed by gods, oracles, and the like. If he really admired that oracle this time, he would be suspicious. Phoebe believed in the existence of gods, but he wasn't a firm believer. He believed in gods, but he just wanted to get more benefits for himself through them. In that case, Royd, bring her in and let me see her. The emperor said. Royd nodded, and then a green figure walked in from the entrance of the palace. The emperor's eyes widened in an instant. His turbid eyes stared at the graceful figure with infatuation, and he couldn't see anything else. She's actually such a beauty. He muttered. Phoebe felt that after seeing this beauty, his new concubines that he liked very much just a moment ago instantly lost their color. She was like a vibrant flower that bloomed brilliantly. Compared to her, his beautiful concubines were like plastic handicrafts. She was beautiful, but she had lost her most important life force and soul. Gu Xingyin's expression didn't change, but a trace of disgust flashed through her heart. This emperor's gaze was too blatant. She blinked her eyes without batting an eyelid. The emperor felt as if his consciousness had fallen into a world of ice and snow. He couldn't help but shudder, and he no longer had the mood to admire the beauty. "Hello, Your Majesty the Emperor of the Roth Empire." Gu Xingyin lowered her head slightly and greeted Phoebe. She did not bow to him. As an oracle of the goddess of nature, she did not need to bow to any royal authority. Emperor Phoebe came back to his senses and carefully sized up Gu Xingyin. Of course, he didn't forget Royd. This oracle was clearly introduced by Royd. Logically speaking, the two should know each other, but from the moment this oracle entered until she spoke, the two didn't even look at each other. Chapter 974. Phoebe rejoiced inwardly. It was clear that the relationship between the oracle and Royd wasn't that harmonious. But he was still worried. The emperor asked Gu Xingyin, "Oracle, I heard that you have a good relationship with my brother, Duke Royd." The emperor did not miss Gu Xingyin's expression, so he clearly saw Gu Xingyin's frown when he addressed him as Grand Duke Royd. Gu Xingyin was silent for a moment before replying, "Duke Royd is very confident. He's a man without faith. I stayed at the Duke's residence for a night. As the oracle of the goddess of nature, I can't be his guide." Her words were rather tactful, but the emperor could easily hear the subtext, "Duke Royd and I are different and don't work together. Our relationship isn't good at all." The emperor suddenly laughed out loud. He stood up and walked to Royd's side. He reached out and patted him on the shoulder. "Duke Royd is indeed an atheist. I'm different from him. I definitely believe in the existence of gods." Gu Xingyin praised him at the right time. The goddess of nature always pays attention to her believers. She'll definitely know of your loyal faith. The two chatted about gods for a while. The emperor felt that this oracle was very much to his liking, especially since she was so beautiful. She was truly a rare beauty. After listening patiently for a while, Duke Royd seemed to be unable to bear the topic between them and finally said goodbye. After Royd left, the emperor said meaningfully, "Look, every time Grand Duke Royd hears about the gods, he becomes so impatient. He meant that an oracle like you wouldn't have a good ending with Royd." Gu Xingyin nodded respectfully. Duke Royd and the goddess of nature aren't fated to be together. The emperor finally smiled in satisfaction. No one knew what the emperor and the mysterious oracle talked about that day. The palace servants strangely discovered that their emperor's attitude toward the oracle was very strange. Logically speaking, with the emperor's personality, he wouldn't let go of such a beautiful and charming woman. So what if he was an oracle? How many oracles had the emperor played with? With the title of God spokesperson, it would be even more satisfying to conquer them. However, not only did His Majesty not do anything to the oracle, but his attitude toward Gu Xingyin was also a little too respectful. He didn't even have the slightest interest in the 9-colored deer by the oracle's side. Instead, he instructed his attendants to take good care of it every day. This abnormal behavior made the maids in the palace very cautious when facing Gu Xingyin. Gu Xingyin snickered. She had only used some tricks to make the emperor believe that the goddess of nature truly existed and was looking at the continent through him. At the thought of having a god by his side, even the emperor would feel uneasy. She took up residence in the imperial palace of the Roth Empire. Phoebe specially chose a very elegant palace and found a few of the most beautiful and considerate maids to take care of her. However, Gu Xingyin did not show any abnormalities. She was waiting for a chance for the emperor to know her importance. Chapter 975. This opportunity came very quickly. There was a rare drought in the northwest of the Roth Empire. Although the empire had sent many water mages and taken many remedial measures, the daily reports from the northwest still made Fibbit very annoyed. If it was during the Age of Glory, the water gods' believers would only need to pray to the gods to solve this problem. But now that the water god had fallen into a long slumber, there were no more believers. It was likely that people nowadays would not think of praying to the gods. After waiting for 2 days, Gu Xingyin realized that Emperor Phoebus had no intention of looking for him at all. He sighed inwardly, thinking that the humans now relied too little on the gods. He got up and went to look for Emperor Phoebus. Inside the emperor's palace, the tea is so hot. Phoebus impatiently threw the tea in his hand and the teacup on the ground. The maid in charge of serving the tea trembled as she knelt on the ground. She was usually very favored, but at this moment, she was very afraid. Their emperor was a very temperamental person. When he was happy, he could casually reward you with countless treasures, but when he was unhappy, he could also casually take your life. Today's tea was clearly brewed according to His Majesty's favorite temperature, but His Majesty was in a bad mood today. If he said it was hot, then it could only be her fault. Phoebus coldly looked at the woman kneeling in front of him, a cruel look flashing through his eyes. Just as he was about to order someone to take her away, a faint voice came from outside. "Your Majesty, your heart needs to calm down." It was as if a cool breeze had appeared out of thin air, and a feeling as gentle as water surrounded Phoebus, calming his restless heart for the past few days. Gu Xingyin's figure appeared in the hall. Phoebus narrowed his eyes and looked at Gu Xingyin. He looked down at the maid kneeling on the ground and coldly spat out a word, "Scram." The maid hurriedly cleaned up the residue on the ground as if she had been pardoned. When she passed by Gu Xingyin, she gave her a grateful look. The people in the hall all retreated, and Phoebus quietly looked at Gu Xingyin. "What brings you here, Oracle?" Gu Xingyin smiled and said, "Of course I'm here because of your Majesty's troubles." Phoebe sneered, my trouble is," halfway through his sentence, he suddenly widened his eyes and looked at Gu Xingyin. "You have a way." Gu Xingyin smiled sadly and helplessly. "I've said it before. On this continent, there are very few problems that the goddess of nature can't solve. It's a pity." Phoebe's eyes lit up when he heard that the goddess of nature could solve this problem. However, Gu Xingyin paused and did not speak. He hurriedly asked, "What's a pity?" Gu Xingyin's expression was very sorrowful. "It's a pity that people don't have faith. Without enough faith, the prayers of humans can't be heard by the goddess of nature, and she can't intervene in the affairs of the human world." The emperor frowned. "Can the oracle be more specific?" Gu Xingyin. As expected of someone without wisdom. If Lloyd was here, he would definitely understand what she wanted. She smiled and explained to Phoebus that the goddess of nature needed the prayers of humans. The more sincere the heart, the more likely the goddess of nature could hear it, and the more power she could use. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.